It is 7:30 and I think we'll get going because we're starting a little later tonight. So hi everybody, thank you for attending what is yet another virtual Board of Education meeting. Before we start, let's just run through a couple of things to help you out. So I'm going to call the meeting to order. Not yet, Michael, he's ahead of the game there. The agenda for the meeting tonight is on our Board Docs website. You can get there via the greenwichpublicschools.org site. We've got 3 items tonight. It's reopening, our agenda planning for the coming year, and our policy discussion. Special meeting, so we're not taking public comments tonight, but of course members of the community can and should email the Board of Education. You can email all of us on a single email address, which is boardofedmembers@greenwich.k12.ct.us. Again, it's boardofedmembers@greenwich.k12.ct.us. We've been getting a lot of emails. Thank you to the public. When we can't answer your question, I've been turning them over to the superintendent, and I know she gets to them as quick as she can. Meeting is being recorded. It'll be posted. You can link to it off of our website. And again, please click like on our YouTube page. We're hoping to get some royalties from this. So we're gonna have some discussion tonight between the superintendent, board members, and some of our administrators. I'd ask that the participants state their name each time they speak. Please mute when you're not speaking. We're gonna use the raise the hand function so we can call on you in turn. I'd ask board members to try to keep their comments concise. If you've got questions, ask them up front. And then any voting, we'll be doing roll call. I think we only really need to vote on the agenda and the and Joe's famous motion at the end of the meeting. So with that, we'll go right to the Pledge of Allegiance. Michael, if you could post the flag. There we go, thank you. Let me just get my screen up here. All right, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, we'll get reset. So I'll need a motion to approve the meeting agenda.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Is there a second for that?
Karen Hirsch, I'll second it.
Thank you, Karen Hirsch. All right, we're gonna well, we can't really change it. It's a special meeting. So we'll take our vote on the meeting agenda. Bernstein is a yes. Stowe?
Yes.
Hirsch?
Yes.
Downey?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
Kowalski? Karen, I think you're muted. Unless we might have lost her. She was on. Oh, there she is. Karen?
Yeah, I'm here.
Are you a yes?
Yes.
Thank you. And Miss Olson?
Yes.
And Mr. Scher?
Yes.
Great, thank you very much. All right, so the first order of business, the one that I think we're all here to learn about, is our school reopening plan. I know a lot of work has gone into this. I know the reopening committee met at the end of last week again, so we're going to be getting an update tonight. I'm going to signal to board members we'll probably need another meeting before we go back to school, possibly for another update on this, as well as voting on the policy that we're going to discuss later. So just keep that in mind as we roll through. And I want to thank the 245 or so attendees that are dialed in for this. So with that, Dr. Jones, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Bernstein. Tonight's meeting is really on scheduling, and that was the request the last time we met, was what would a schedule look like, elementary, middle, and high school. And once we share that information, we will then talk a little bit about special education. So we're just showing you a couple of the slides we shared at our reopening meeting just the other day. And for those people who could be watching for the first time tonight, we always start our reopening meetings and presentations with this slide so that people understand how the return to school planning team works. We have a district task force in the middle, which is looking at just overall planning and helping to get inputs from all of those different groups around the outer edge, and that's kind of the white box. And then we're really focused on those 4 priorities, maintaining health and safety guidelines with everything that we do in the planning, our enhanced focus on SEL, which we've talked a lot about that, our social emotional learning, high quality programming for all ages, and then our analysis of achievement data to close the gap, accelerate the pathway, and maximize learning for all students. Thanks, Mike. This is just an idea of the different task force meetings that have taken place. They are all recorded. They're on the website. I would just caution, as I mentioned last Thursday, if you are new to watching these meetings, I would actually look at the ones that are most recent, because with the working with the state of Connecticut, there have been lots of changes since we entered the summer, and we get updates literally, I want to say almost daily, definitely weekly. These are some of our focus groups. Again, many of these are recorded. They're available for you to watch. We are continuing with these, and probably tomorrow or Wednesday, you will see a list of several more town halls that will be focused on elementary, middle, high school, special education, remote learning, and those dates will be coming out to add to these. Also, this is tonight's special meeting, which was to talk about obviously scheduling. So I'm going to actually turn it over to start us with elementary with Mark D'Amico, who is our director of our K-8. Mr. D'Amico.
Good evening, everyone. This is a little bit redundant. You've seen this in the past. Mike, if you could bring up the presentation, please.
I just
Okay.
need 1 second to get it up. Where are you, everybody? Crud. Doo-doo-doo. Where are you?
This is like freezing the kicker, Mike.
There we go. And share. There we go.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, we can go right through to the second slide. So a while back, I was asked to present a visual model of what a remote learning day could look like at the elementary school. So this should look familiar to many people, but I'll take you through it quickly. In the green, that's identified as synchronous classroom instructional time or live instruction. The pink is asynchronous instructional time. Now, that could be a little bit of a misnomer, because although it's asynchronous, there are opportunities there for the teacher to work either independently with students or in small groups. And that's why I wanted to really highlight those two pink areas. So even though it's not direct live instruction to the whole class, the teacher is online and they are expected to be pulling either small groups or meeting individually with students or responding to questions, or generally being available to students during those blocks. The blue is synchronous live instruction of our special area teachers. That's music, art, PE. It's media as well in K and 2. And those are the identified specials. You'll see that there is time for lunch and recess and a break. And then below there's science, and there's also interactive read aloud, and we will always start and end our day with an activity for the entire class. So the morning meeting could consist of a social emotional learning activity. The afternoon can consist of a social emotional learning activity, could be a read aloud, it could be a second step lesson, but the opportunity is there for the class to come together as a community, and we felt that was really important. If you could go to the next slide, Mike. I thought it might be helpful, and this research just came out about a week and a half ago, to compare our Greenwich model to a research-based model. So if you go to the next slide, Mike. The Congrove distance learning model comes to us from Columbia University, from actually the Center for Public Research and Learning within Columbia University. It takes into consideration a couple of assumptions. One, that all students have a device to access online learning. And it also takes into certain assumptions, the grade span, the length of in-person student day, length of a remote student day, length of instructional staff day. By way of comparison, we have roughly 6.5 hours of in-person student day time. And at the elementary level, it can be 4.5 to 5 hours, depending on the special that's presented to the student that day. So this Congrove model is pretty representative of what our assumptions bear in mind. So I thought it was a good crosswalk for us to take tonight. So if we can go to the next slide. This is the Congrove model side by side. They offer a K2 model and a 3-5 model. And what you'll notice is they have the minutes placed on the left-hand side and then the days of the week. And you'll notice how they break out their activities. They have a morning message school-wide. They also close their day with an SEL activity. And then throughout the course of the day, they have small group activities. They have academic times embedded in the day. And they also have 2 essential area times that they've broken out into 30-minute chunks. And that's the art, music, PE, health. And you'll see that twice in each of their schedules. They have a writing block, off video for a lunch period, and then there's the math instruction as well. What you're going to notice when we go to the next slide is it's very similar to the model that we've created. And so if you look at the Greenwich K2 model by way of comparison, you will notice that we are opening and closing in a similar fashion. We have our academic blocks outlined. One difference that we have is that we have a larger essential area block. That's again, the art, music, PE, media. And you'll notice that our academic blocks are actually a little bit more rigorous in terms of time requirements than the Congrove model, but it's very similar in nature. Let's take a look at the 3-5 comparison as well. Mike? Again, you'll see that they open and close with an SEL activity or a morning message. So do we. We have our math mini lesson, our small group instruction or independent tasks identified. We have science. We have a snack break. We have our language arts block. We have a lunch and recess off video. We have our specials in the afternoon, an interactive read aloud. And if you crosswalk over to the Congrove model, again, very similar. I think that if you're going to look for something that's different, you're going to see that the art, music, and PE block, we have 1, they have 2. They've broken them up into 30-minute periods. If you go to the next slide, Mike, I've been receiving a lot of questions about what does ALP look like using a cohort model. So if you can go to the next slide, Mike, I want to start with talking about what the strategy was. So the superintendent tasked me with the strategy of developing an ALP cohort to lower homeroom class size. And I think it's important to mention that because it's not one of the top health mitigation strategies that we're emphasizing as we are returning to school. And this is critical. Again, let's go back to the 3 key mitigation strategies that we're asking everyone to follow. That's wearing a mask, maintaining a safe social distance, which the building principals and facilities department are actively doing on a daily basis in terms of identifying classroom space, the appropriate furniture, following the distancing requirements, and then also making sure that people are washing their hands or using Purell with frequency. Those are the key 3 health mitigation strategies. This cohorting strategy was to lower homeroom sizes, and that is what this scenario accomplishes. Now again, this does mean that the ALP schedule looks a little different. So in this first schedule, what you will notice is that this is a teacher A sample schedule, and it takes into consideration a combination of English language arts and STEM content areas for that teacher to instruct in. And again, it's color coded. So you have direct instruction in green, you have the small group independent work in pink, and then you have the areas such as lunch and prep, snack in a beige color. If we could go to the next slide, if this scenario is adopted by a particular school, teacher A and teacher B have very similar schedules because they're both teaching a combination of English language arts and the STEM content areas. Now, there's a different scenario that I've proposed to principals as well, and I thought I would take you through that. So Mike, if we could go to the next slide. This is a different scenario where teacher A is teaching only English language arts. We wanted to create this option as well because in many buildings, historically, advanced learning program teachers have taught based on discipline. So I wanted to present to you tonight what that option would look like as well. And again, what you'll notice here is the students start in their homerooms, then they go to an identified area for their ALP instruction. They do go back for lunch, they go back for recess, and they go back for the end of the day where there's the dismissal. It's also important, I think, to mention that not all of the students are descending upon one location at the same time. So 4th and 5th grade students would be coming out of their homerooms at the same time, but the 2nd and 3rd graders come out much later in the afternoon. So it's not that you're having 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th all leave their homerooms at the same time and then, you know, converging on a location where that would then be overcrowded. And in fact, some of the work that we did today was to take some pictures in one of our media centers that's actually set up for ALP instruction in this manner. And we can certainly share that out moving forward. Mike, if we could go to the next page. Mike, if you go to the next page.
This was the next page. Do you want the one after that?
Oh yeah, yep. So this is teacher B, sample B. This is the ALP teacher who would be teaching the STEM block. So again, in scenario B, this is for principals, assistant principals, and the ALP teachers in that building to make a determination on which scenario works best for them. And obviously you're going to lean on what has worked in the past, what level of exposure and experience the ALP teachers have had teaching these content areas, and then each individual building will make their determination on which scenario they ultimately will go with. Thanks, Mike. Sorry about that. Another question that I've received quite a few times is, how are you minimizing movement for art and music staff? So if we could pivot to the next slide, great. We're going what's called the unit approach. And so in the unit approach, you have a music A and an art A. So in music A, the music teacher would teach for 8 weeks all of the students in 3rd grade, 1st grade, and 5th grade, while their counter in art would teach kindergarten, 2nd, and 4th for an 8-week cycle. Then that would rotate for another 8-week cycle. And Mike, if you go to the next slide. What will happen after each of those 8-week cycles, we would be in January at that point, we would transition to 5-week cycles for the remainder of the year. And that gives us a true balance to make sure that every child K through 5 receive the same amount of art and music instruction. I'm sometimes asked also, well, what about physical education? And so the fact of the matter is, physical education will occur in either the gymnasium and or outside, weather permitting. Now we're hoping for a nice mild fall and even milder winter so that the kids can be outside, because that also will then double as a mask break, because the kids are allowed to take their masks off outside. But more importantly, some of the professional development we will do with the PE teachers before the school year starts is identifying in that large space that they have in the gymnasium, opportunities for PE instruction that is safe and socially distanced. So this is the design that we have currently for art and music. I thought I would just speak really quickly to physical education as well. And I'm happy to take any questions that you have either now or at the end of our presentations. Thank you, Mike. I'm going to turn it over to Gordon, I believe, at the middle school.
That would be right, Mark. Thank you. And I'm not sure Mark left me too many words, but I'll see what we can do here. Tom, Jason, and I have been working very closely together to plan for the upcoming school year for all kids in building. And the schedule we created actually is going to work for whether we're all in, whether we have some sort of hybrid model, which is always a possibility, or we're all remote. So when we go over the schedule, I think it's a good schedule for all three. It's not ideal for any one of the 3 options, but right now we're planning all in. So that's what the schedule kind of speaks to right now. So one way we're doing that is by cohorting the kids. And we're going to cohort by team. So what that means, 100 kids will be together. They'll be in the same 5, 6, 7, 8 rooms all day long with each other. They're eating lunch just with each other. They will travel to different classrooms, different levels of classes. within those 100 kids, but they're going to stay in that group. They're going to pass at the same time with nobody else. They'll have a separate door to enter. They're going to have separate bathrooms to go to as much as we can do that. So we're really going to keep those kids together as much as possible during the school day, recognizing what happens after school is beyond our control. In addition to the cohorting of the kids, we're also going to cohort teachers so that there's a limited number of adults who will also see the kids. So the same 100 kids would have the same gym teacher and the same music teacher and the same tech teacher. And then they'd switch after a period of time. But that also limits the interactions that they're going to have among each other and among the adults. We're also having, the rooms are going to be kind of isolated too, so that people will be pushing in the classroom. So the special ed or ELL or interventionists will push in the core classrooms so that we can limit the interactions and the contacts that way. Next slide, Mike. So other things we're doing, and Mark addressed some of these, but let me just go into a little more detail. So all kids and adults wear a mask. That is a non-negotiable. If your kid's going to be a conscientious objector, you don't want to choose the in-school option. The remote option is for him or her. We'll be building in mask breaks as well. We used to have, the kids all have lockers. We're not going to use the lockers right now. Lockers are going to be, they will just congest the hallways. So we no use of lockers. Kids will be allowed to carry backpacks back and forth. There's hand sanitizer in each classroom and outside of each bathroom. We'll be reinforcing that use. I don't know too many 13-year-olds who wash their hands often, but we'll work on it as best we can. We're going to stagger the passing times so that within a 10-minute window, 2 or 3 teams will pass, but not in the same 3 or 4 minute window. So once one team is in the classroom, next team will go. We're also, to Mark's point, we're going to encourage outside instruction as much as weather will allow, unless the plan appropriate. We've already lined the hallways, so every hallway has a line down the middle. Hopefully your kids know right and left. I'm not sure they do, but right line down the middle. There's also arrows. They have feet. I guess they know how to walk with their feet. But it's all lined up. The stairs are split down the middle. So really making sure I'm going to force that kids stay on the right side of the hallway. The buildings will be disinfected every evening. The cafeteria will be disinfected after each lunch wave. I think we each have 3 or 4 lunch waves. So after lunch wave, there's a 10-minute break in between, and we will disinfect the cafeterias at that time. That's the only space that 2 cohorts might see in the same day. That's why they're getting in-school disinfecting. The classrooms are all set up so that we have all kids facing forward. It's very anti what we've done the last many years, but that's what we have to do to be safe right now. So all kids are facing forward. They are about 4 feet apart from each other. For the most part, they have their own table. In the cases where they can't have their own table, we have them on the side with the plexiglass in between. So they're still 3 feet apart with the plexiglass divider. And again, masks at all times. No congregating before school. It's a very popular activity for middle school. They hang out. There's no hanging out anymore. So with the doors open at 7:20, all kids will go right to their first block class at 7:20. We'll have teachers manning the doors, different entrances, teachers manning the classrooms, and that's where they'll go right away. We're also going to stagger release time. As much as we can. The buses all leave at the same time, but we'll stagger it by teams. So they're leaving at different doors at different times. We're also, and for the time being, there'll be no late buses or after school activities for the start of the school year. So those are kind of steps we're taking to keep kids safe. It looks a little bit different in each school, just because of how our sizes and how we do our scheduling. But we've been very much on the same page as we've kind of rolled this out. And I turn it over to Jason now to talk kind of a little bit more about the electives and some of the choices we had to make.
Thank you, Gordon. Jason Goldstein, principal over at Eastern Middle School. So as Gordon was mentioning, Tom Gordon and I have been working every day together regarding trying to get as aligned as we can, but at the same time, there are some subtle differences with logistics and scheduling and sizes. One building might have 2 cohorts or teams on a grade level. Another building might have 3 based on the size of that particular grade level class. And that obviously creates some differences. So in general, though, the overall objective was, as Gordon said, was to have a model that if we shift from in-person all students to a hybrid model to a full remote or to return back to school, the same model works. So what's best for students is not to have to change teachers, try to rebuild a master schedule in the middle of a year or on a moment's notice. So with that, obviously, there are some changes that were made regarding electives, also to maintain the cohorting. As Gordon mentioned, the elective teachers are also cohorted. So for example, a particular team has a PE teacher, an art teacher, a music teacher, et cetera, and students would rotate through, and I'll explain that a little bit more in a minute. So with that, for safety reasons, obviously, this is all being done to make this as a safe return for students in the building. certain things that would be difficult to maintain safety, things like, band and blowing into an instrument, or chorus and singing out loud, obviously are things that we couldn't do even with a little bit greater distance between students. So students, as part of an elective offering, they will be receiving a general music and music appreciation elective. To do this and to staff this amongst the various grade levels and various cohorts, all of our music staff, including strings teachers, will need to, obviously offer this to students and conduct this. In terms of some of the other electives, things like PE and health, we're going to obviously, administer or have PE outside, as Mark said, even at the elementary level as well, outside as much as weather permits. We're going to look at obviously whatever adjustments to the actual activities they're doing to maintain distance and student safety while doing that. Depending on the building and the cohorts and the staffing, the health may be embedded within PE time. It may be separate from PE time. And again, those are some of the slight subtle differences from building to building, but all students will obviously receive their PE as well as their health. The other electives, they will obviously be cohorted. So what will happen is there will be a rotation that students will go through. So for example, students may have 60 days on one team or one cohort of art as their elective, where after that 45 to 60 days, they would shift to, let's say, music, or let's say PE, where another team would get the art teacher. So there would be time to obviously disinfect materials, and this way you wouldn't have multiple cohorts using the art room or using a particular space. So again, the students will have their various electives, but they'll do it instead of what was historically maybe a pattern basis. It'll be for every day for a period of time, whether it be 45 or 60 days, and then they'll shift to another elective. So that's how the electives will be administered. Some of the electives, as much as we're trying to maintain all the wonderful offerings that every building normally has, some of the things just aren't possible to do the way we've always done them. So for example, the seminar elective, what we're going to do is we're going to be able to embed a lot of the seminar elective activities and experiences within the ELA experience for students, but it can't be run as another separate elective. There just aren't enough available blocks in the day for students to do that with all the other academics they have. And you can see here that depending on the building, things like digital literacy, it'll either be a separate elective or it will be embedded into the curriculum of other areas as well. And again, these are just the subtle differences from building to building. But the majority of the offerings that we do, while they look a little different in the way they're implemented, the students are still getting as close to the experience that they normally do, if the word normal is even appropriate for this type of conversation. So I'm going to turn it over to Tom, who's going to talk a little bit more about sort of a day schedule and what that looks like.
Thanks, Jason. Tom Healy, principal of Central Middle School. So basically, as Jason and Gordon shared, we've been working very closely to try to develop master schedules that can work in sort of any one of our models. So what we tried to do is say, what does that look like in person? So basically, in-person classes, the schedule, if anyone has had a child in middle school recently at any of the buildings, will look very typical to what your previous child or current child has experienced. The number of classes they're going to have in a given day is the same. The length of the class periods are relatively the same. The minor adjustments that we are making really are related to how we can social distance and keep kids safely in their cohorts with their teachers. So it has to do with how our electives are scheduled and the passing time that we have. But otherwise, when kids are in the classroom and interacting with the teachers and the curriculum, that all should look very similar to what we've experienced prior to our current situation. Beyond that, what we also wanted to clarify as well was, should we have to shift to a remote learning situation, that we would be much more scheduled than we were last year when we were doing it for the first time. So we really took the lessons learned, and we've implemented this master schedule that if we had to tack to a remote learning situation, even in a moment's notice, the expectation really would be that students are following the schedule that they would have followed were they in school, and working through their school day that way. What we've put on the full remote side of this particular slide is just an example of what a lesson could look like, so you could get a sense of the experience for a student. So your child has 7 periods in a given class day. Those classes are about 45 to 50 minutes long. That's what they would be experiencing in school. And as soon as we switch to remote learning, they would still be interacting with those teachers and those classmates just in a virtual setting. And this is an example from the Global Online Learning Academy of a potential 50-minute lesson, what it could look like to be more interactive for our students, where students and teachers are mimicking more what it's like to learn in person. So you see there's, sort of your traditional intro warm-up transition time. You have about 10 minutes or so, maybe that's a little more teacher-led, teacher-directed. And then the rest of the period is really broken out as any other class would be, where students are taking that material that's being presented and interacting with it at a deeper level, following a line of inquiry, engaging in small group discussion, tackling some independent work, and then coming back together as a large class, debriefing in an online discussion, and some sort of formative assessment of learning, closure and wrap up from the teacher. So again, this is just an example of how we are working with our staff to support their professional development and professional learning, and how to enhance the remote learning experience for students and have it look more like what it is like when we are in person. So the schedules that we are all creating, as you can see, thanks Mike, really, certain advisor base, AB stands for advisor base, SEL is obviously social and emotional learning. Those may move around during a given day based on a grade level, because that is what we're actually using to create our staggered passing times. But this just gives you an example of what your child or a middle school child may be experiencing on a given day, where they would have each of their classes, and how that would look so that their electives are cohorted, where they're only receiving classes in those classroom spaces with elective teachers in a given day, and we're limiting the cross cohorting. So this is, again, just an example of something that could be used, or it might look like, in order to implement all of our classes in our traditional schedule model. And this would, again, work whether we are in school or whether that's remote.
Great. Mr. Mayo, do you want to go ahead and share the high school, and Ms. Talata? Oh. You're muted, Ralph.
Thanks, Tony. It's a pleasure to be with you guys tonight. I wanted to say before I start my presentation that this schedule was developed in collaboration with teachers, students, administrative staff, and all of it was chaired by Ms. Talata, who did, I think, an amazing job in putting this together. We had input from almost everyone we could tap on their shoulder and take a look at this before we presented it. We started back in June thinking about hybrid because, as you all know, there's 2,800 students at Greenwich High School, plus another 300 people that actually work there. So putting together 3,100 people at the same time did not seem realistic to us. So we started with hybrid, and thank God the governor finally agreed with us. So that's where we are at this point. This schedule allows all students to be in the physical classroom regularly with their teacher, and accommodates the class that meet 3 times, 2 times, or 1 time per cycle. Mike, if you could show the slide of the schedule. And I'll keep talking a little bit about our rationale. There's 41 courses in business, art, family, consumer science, music, theater, technology, media, reading, and innovation lab that meet 3 times a cycle. That comes out to 602 sections. So we really couldn't move away from our block schedule, because it would have been unhealthy for us to do so in terms of graduation requirements, and also for the classes that students look forward to taking each day. So we kept our 8-day rotating block schedule, 6 periods a day, dropped 2 because of that. We just couldn't go back and reschedule all those kids that were in those 602 sections. The hybrid model that you're seeing on the screen right now, it's both in-person and remote instruction plan, and it keeps the hours of instruction intact for each of the courses. It also ensures that students are accessing instruction whether they're in person or logged on to Google Meets at the same time. We know that based on last spring, that daily structure is so healthy for our students, and so we wanted to make sure that we were broadcasting live to one group of students while the other group of students was in school with us. So at this point, we're talking about 1,400 students will be in Greenwich High School on Mondays and Tuesdays. That'll be the Greenwich cohort. And on Thursdays and Fridays, we'll have the Cardinal cohort in school with us. On Monday and Tuesday, when the Greenwich cohort is in the building with us, the Cardinal cohort will be live streaming this schedule onto their Chromebooks. And on Thursday and Friday, the Greenwich cohort will be home live streaming. On Wednesdays, we are going to full remote learning. So there will not be anyone in school. We're still undecided whether we're going to have the teachers work from school or from their homes. That's still one of the many questions that we still have. But that Wednesday schedule, if we have to go to full remote, will be the schedule. Will look like that will be that day will look like the rest of the 8-day cycle, which I'll show you in a second. So again, Cardinals on Monday, Tuesday, the Greenwich cohort on Monday, Tuesday, the Cardinals on Thursday, Friday. If you could go to the next slide, Mike. And then we color coordinated the schedule. So the pink blocks, which is, there's only one, it's the first block of the day, it's 56 minutes. And we made that a little bit longer because we're planning on a staggered arrival of students. So they're all not, as Gordon mentioned, our children like to cluster together. So we're going to try and stop that and have a staggered arrival of students and have them go to the part of the building where their class is taking place. So we're going to try and open some outside doors to get them to the part of the building without them having to go through the student center, which we will close for the first thing in the morning. The green blocks are all 51 minutes. The yellow block is lunch block. It's 55-minute block plus a 30-minute lunch for everyone. And the blue part of the schedule is the SEL portion of our schedule plus the staggered exit of our students. There's 6 minutes of passing time, and the team is still discussing the best way to quickly and safely move students and staff around the building. We're pretty close with that, but we haven't finalized that yet. Next slide, Mike. So this is the explanation for remote learning Wednesdays. Again, first block is slightly longer. The green periods are 51 minutes. Lunch, all students are going to be eating from lunch from 11:20 to 11:50, and then we'll have class from 12:56 to 12:51, and then again we will have social emotional learning period on that Wednesday, as we do not have to have a staggered release. Next one. As you can see, our full remote learning schedule, if we have to use this, is it's exactly the same as our Wednesday schedule for our hybrid. So we can keep going, Mike. And keep going through there, Mike. It's just more, this is just more explanation of why we put the schedule together this way. I just want to go to the first just want to go to the, excuse me. Just wanted to go to the 9th grade first day of school, the orientation day on September 8th. Mike, if you have that. Okay, so we wanted both groups, both the Greenwich cohort and the Cardinal cohort, to come to school on that day, but not at the same time. So we have split them morning and afternoon. The Greenwich cohort will come in the morning. The Cardinal cohort will come in the afternoon, as you can see. And then we're going to move on to the first few days of school. And we put together a couple of options for that, but we have all agreed that the option 2 would be our best bet. So on Wednesday, the Greenwich cohort will be at Greenwich High School in the morning, and the Cardinal cohort will be at Greenwich High School in the afternoon. That'll be day A, the first day of school. And then the Cardinal cohort on Thursday with the Greenwich cohort live streaming, and then Friday, the Greenwich cohort at Greenwich High School and the Cardinal cohort live streams. We thought that would be a fair and equitable way to do it, half day for each group, and then one day home and one day, one group live streaming for the next 2 days. I think it's a schedule that'll work. I think we've worked out a lot of our issues so far, but we still have a ways to go before we bring students back into the building. We're meeting tomorrow about how we're going to be transporting and how we're going to be coming in waves. So those questions are still out there. There's also going to be some more announcements from the CIAC about athletics. That'll be coming on Wednesday, so keep an eye on it for that. We plan on doing as many of our after-school activities as we can remotely, so keep those going throughout the school year, and that's pretty much it.
Thanks, Ralph. Now Mary Ford is going to share about special education.
Okay, Mike, go ahead and put up the slides. And let me just say, to start out with, we started with the same premise that everybody else did. Our first goal is to keep students as safe as possible. We also want to make sure that we are making the regular education, general education classroom available to students, and that also we, as much as we can, stay with the services as described in what I will be referring to through the presentation as the PrePandemic IEP. So every student has a PrePandemic IEP, which is the services that the team decided, along with the parents, that this is the program the student should follow in school as we used to know it. And that's the PrePandemic IEP. There are going to be occasions where we have to make changes, and I'll talk about this in a minute, but the PrePandemic IEP will not be changed unless the student's needs have changed. So if something happened and the present levels of performance need to change on the IEP, we will change those, but the services will not be adjusted to reflect what has to happen during either hybrid learning or remote learning. So there are some common guidelines across all of the special education levels. The first is that students will be served as much as possible in a cohort. For the preschool students, that cohort is their classroom. At the elementary level, the cohort is their grade. At the middle school level, their cohort is their team. And at the high school level, the cohort will be the primary location of their special education services. So for a high school student, for special ed purposes, their cohort is the group of students that are in their academic lab or the students that are in the wellness center with them. We will, to the maximum extent we can, let parents know anytime that their child is served outside of a cohort. So if for some reason they have to be in a situation where there are students in their close proximity who are not in their cohort, we will let parents know. And if parents choose to tell us, or if parents choose not to have that happen, we'll make other arrangements. To the maximum extent possible, particularly at the elementary level, students will be provided services as push-in within their general education classroom. At the secondary level, it will be push-in, but also in their classes or in their academic lab/resource room within their cohort. Given this cohort structure, there may be times when we have to make changes to the pre-pandemic IEP services. So for example, you might have had a student who got some service 2 times 30 in a small group, but that small group had kids from 2 different grade levels or across teams. So in order to keep them within cohort, we may have to switch that to a 1 times 50 service so that that teacher would now be serving 2 different cohorts, but in 2 different classes. So any change that has to be made to the pre-pandemic IEP will go on a separate plan that will be shared with parents that will only be followed during the time our schedules are adjusted given the state of education, whether we're in hybrid closure or remote. To the extent we can, students will have disposable paper products. Anything that's not disposable, so if students have plastic supports or they have visual schedules, those will all be kept in separate containers for the student in bins and cleaned after each activity, even though it's served and stored in their bin. Next slide, please, Mike. In terms of related services, speech therapists will only serve students in the building. At the elementary level, sometimes we would have children coming in from out of the building, usually preschoolers who come in just for speech. That will not happen. We'll serve them somewhere else, but speech therapists will only serve students in the building. Occupational and physical therapy will observe social distance to the maximum extent possible. If they have to get closer than 3 feet or put their hands on children, they will be wearing masks, gloves, and gowns, and they will be disposed of after that session. Small group sessions and related services will only contain students from the cohort and will follow appropriate social distancing. Again, if that group needs to contain students from another cohort, parents will be made aware of that. For related services, since these people will be seeing students across cohorts, they will change PPEs after every session. Particularly at the high school, we are going to try to have the therapist travel to the students, but that's also true at the other levels, so that kids are not walking around the building where they used to go to a therapist's office. That may have to happen either in the classroom or in a smaller space near the cohort location. And again, if we have to make any changes in the IEP services, that will be documented on a separate plan and shared with parents. In terms of meetings, at this point, our anticipation is that all PPT meetings will be held, but that they will be held remotely. So our goal is that we will have all of our meetings scheduled and conducted in a remote fashion, unless there are unusual or extenuating circumstances. At this point, if we're still allowed to go forward with face-to-face instruction with students, we will continue with our evaluations, both initial and triennial. So we have sneeze guards, which were purchased during the summer. We've ordered a couple more so that we will try to, as much as possible, stay 3 feet away. But if we need to get closer, we will do that using the sneeze guards, and fresh PPEs will be provided after every session with individual students. Next slide. Now, there are some things that are particular to levels. At the preschool level, students will be served in their classroom, that's their cohort. If there are any small groups in preschool, it will happen within the children in their classroom cohort. And if necessary, we will let parents know if we have to cross cohort for any instruction. If students require direct instruction, that will take place within the classroom in a separate location in the room. So we'll try and close it off, but they will not be moving out to another location for direct instruction. We're asking parents to please try and send their kids in manageable preschool clothing. So that means a minimum of zippers and ties and buttons so that teachers don't have to put their hands on kids or have to do that as little as possible. So again, a pair of sweatpants so that if students have to be toileted, teachers don't have to assist the student in buttoning and zipping their pants. We're trying to minimize adult contact because every time an adult does get into direct contact with students, they must be wearing gloves and gowns, and we're trying to avoid that as much as possible, given how it makes us look more like a hospital than a school. Amy and the preschool team came up with a term that they are calling the yuck bucket, which is a trash can where any item that students have touched with their mouth or come into contact with possible saliva from their hands will go into the yuck bucket. And at the end of the day, everything in that bucket will be cleaned thoroughly and dried so that it's available the next day. And again, speech therapists will only serve children in the building. We will not have kids in private preschools around town coming into schools to get their services. Next, please. For elementary students, again, in the elementary level, their cohort is their grade. So our goal is to assign teachers to cohorts, whereas teachers may have had a group of students that they were the monitor for across grades. The goal is, as much as possible, to keep teachers in cohorts, preferably 2 grade cohorts if that works out, so that they can then spend, my word is a chunk of time. So where you saw some of those, I think they were beige sections in Mark's elementary staffing, where kids were doing independent work or small groups with the teachers, that's a time if the teacher, special ed teacher, is assigned to that cohort, then they can actually serve students without impacting as little as possible their general education time. The time allotted to the cohort will depend on the number of students within the cohort. So you may have a teacher who's got a 1st grade cohort and a 5th grade cohort, but given the number of students in the cohort, they're only spending an hour and a half in the 1st grade cohort and 4 hours in the 5th grade cohort. So it won't be exactly half a day. It will really depend on the number of students in their cohorts. Related services, the school-based therapists will provide all the services for the students in the elementary level. That does mean that they will be seeing all children across cohorts. So they will be PPing up for every student and changing their PPEs after every student that they see. And we're going to try as much as possible to stay outside of the time that the special ed teacher is in the cohort so that they're getting the maximum amount of special education service given the scheduling. Next slide, please, Mike. Middle school. Again, teachers will be assigned to 1 team in every school because at the middle school level, the team is the cohort. We're going to push in services as much as possible, but there are students who require instruction in a separate setting. Those will be single cohort groups to the maximum extent possible. There may be some cases where we will have to split the class, and in that case, half would live stream and half would be with the teacher while that instruction is going on to keep students from crossing cohorts. The related services are very similar. They will serve students, unfortunately, across all cohorts because there are not that many related service providers in every building, but we will try and keep them to go to the students so that children are not having to travel throughout the building, being in contact with more people and objects that are not within their cohort. Again, related services will put on fresh PPEs after each service. Speech therapists will wear masks that are clear so that students can see their mouths. Occupational physical therapy will observe social distancing. Sessions may have to be adjusted because we're going to try not to have the occupational therapists and physical therapists in many buildings. We're trying to limit the number of buildings they go to. So it may be that they're in one school all day long one day. So a student who had 2 times 30 may have 1 times 45 or 1 times 50 to keep the contact with people from outside of the building and outside of the cohort to the minimum extent possible. They will wear gloves and gowns if they have to be in direct contact with students. Next slide, please. High school. At high school, since kids travel all around, it's a little hard to identify what their cohort is, so that their cohort will be their academic lab or their special education program location for some students. We're trying to keep the special ed teachers in one house as much as possible, and professional assistants in one location as much as possible. We're still trying to work through that because we don't know at this point which people are coming back or have indicated that they will need accommodations. But you may have had a para who've traveled with the student all over the building. We're going to try and minimize that if we can. Unfortunately, all of our community-based instruction will be canceled until further notice, with the exception of Community Connections, which is our 18 to 21-year-old program. That program is looking at the current job sites that kids go to identify which sites they believe students can participate in appropriately. That is keeping their social distance, wearing their mask, and wearing gloves if necessary. Some of our sites will probably not be available to us. Those sites like nursing homes and hospitals do not want people coming in. So we're going to look at some virtual kind of activities for those students. But we will not be using public transportation. If at all possible, we'll be using our van. If we do have students who need to use public transportation, we will require that they wear their mask the whole time they're on public transportation. The last piece in special education is the one we're still working out, and that is that we may have students who given their disability or their ability to participate in distance learning, need to attend school on either 4 or 5 days. So you may have students who are a Greenwich student or a Cardinal student who should be home on Thursday and Friday, but given the nature of their disability and its impact on their ability to participate successfully in remote learning or live streaming, will be in the building on 4 days. We are also looking into having 5-day-a-week student and seeing if we can identify a place in Greenwich High School where, while the building's being cleaned, they could attend and kind of be in the building with their teacher, but they may have to go to a different location given the cleaning schedule of the building. Related services, speech therapists will continue to serve all students with IEPs in the building, but our goal is to have them travel to the students as opposed to having the students travel to them, which would again increase the contact with other people. They will put on new PPEs for each student after they serve them. Same thing with OT and PT. And for students who require group counseling sessions, we will try to keep them within one cohort, but if we have to mix the groups or mix the cohorts, we will use either social distancing and or sneeze guards to protect the students. Next slide, please. And the final is remote learning. If we have to move to remote learning, we expect that the students will follow the learning schedule of their general education class. We will provide the students' special education services will be provided primarily by their special education teacher through live streaming, although there may be use of paraprofessionals to support generalization of what they've learned or assist in their participation in a general education setting. We will, if necessary, travel around and give hands-on material to students if we go into distance learning. Remote learning. One thing we did hear from parents was that there are some students who just need to have hard copies of things. So if necessary, we will print those materials and get them out to families and students if we have to go remote. Again, if we have to go into remote, we will develop a remote learning program for students based on their pre-pandemic IEP. There are some things that are in kids' pre-pandemic IEPs that don't make sense or are difficult to do in a distance remote learning medium, so we will have to make some changes to those IEPs, but we will not change the pre-pandemic IEPs. We are also looking at if we can continue to do face-to-face for safety reasons, but we go to remote learning for other reasons. We are investigating the possibility of having some location, not in a school building, where kids could come for social skill development or some instruction. That would also be true for our students who opt for remote learning due to safety reasons. One thing we heard from parents is that even our students who have immune compromised disabilities, who have very difficult time traveling or being around, really miss being around other kids. So we'll see if there's some way we can figure out to get them some contact with students if we have to go into remote learning or if they opt for remote learning. And again, related services would be provided through live streaming, excuse me, with paraprofessionals supplying support for generalization, but not instruction. If parents choose remote learning, as opposed to the district having to go remote learning, we will work with those families to see if there's some way of pursuing some on-site direct instruction for kids, similar to what we did this summer. If you know, this summer we used COSCOM for families who elected for face-to-face services in counseling and speech. So we'd like to be able to offer that. We're looking at some possible locations, not in schools, so we're not introducing new children to buildings, but someplace where they could get live related services outside of school buildings. So that's what I have.
Thank you, Mary. And I just, before we turn it over for questions, I do want to say thank you to the entire team. They've literally spent hours and hours. You know, it's hard enough to do master schedule and just plan to get the year open on a great year. And this year, just the complexities of social distancing and cohorting and everything that it's taking, exits and entryways, and thinking about the buildings really differently. I just very grateful that we have such a strong team and that has really been committed to doing this work to try to get our kids back to school. So thank you. Mr. Bernstein?
Yep, thank you very much. All right, board members, remind you to raise your hand if you want to speak. So Ms. Hirsch, you're up.
Oh, thank you. You know, I know a lot of the information that we've just heard, we have not had a chance to sort of look through in advance. So I have a few questions. I may have, well, I have plenty more for later, but I know we keep noting how one of the main tenets of our reopening plan is an enhanced focus on social and emotional learning, as well as the high quality programming for all of our students. When we closed in the spring, many of our students had connections with teachers and fellow classmates. We're going in the fall, and they won't have that. They'll be moving into new classes with new educators, new support staff, new students in their classes. And we know having a positive connection to an adult in the building is one of the keys to a student's growth, achievement, and comfort. I know we've mentioned that I've mentioned before, but I'm concerned that we keep noting that we're increasing the number of out teachers assigned to each school to accommodate the cohort model and reduce the number of students in a classroom. And I know I've asked this before, but especially since SEL is such an important part of our plan, will we be increasing the number of support staff for all students, as well as school psychologists? You know, we're creating cohorts for certain students, but not the students who have the most demonstrated need. We know that a lot of our students and our staff have some trauma over the way schools were closed. We'll have anxiety with returning to our school buildings. So I'm sort of looking to see how much we're going to be adding more for SEL support and support staff for our student staff, and especially our students who are most at need.
Yeah, I might answer that. We have added a counselor at Eastern, which I know the board's aware of. That was actually in the budget. We feel like from that perspective that, you know, we are staffed okay for when we talk about counselors and psychologists. When you talk about the ALP staffing, especially at elementary, that's not just for ALP. What that's doing is allowing the actual general education classroom to get down to very low numbers so that a classroom teacher, special education teacher who's pushing in are in a much better environment. And that really is what that's about. That's about cohorting. So that is benefiting every single child by getting the classes really tiny so that we can start to fill some of those gaps in learning as we've talked about. Even doing that assessment at the beginning of the year and figuring out exactly where those holes and gaps are for kids. And in a tiny little class allows you to have a lot stronger social emotional support for children. Just even, are they having a great day? How do they feel the minute they walk in the classroom? And that will be there for us.
I just know that, you know, we're creating cohorts for certain levels of need, but the students with the most demonstrated need are not getting those types of cohorts. So I really do have concern. And if we're adding staff to reduce their already low class numbers at the elementary school, I want to make sure that we're giving the same kind of thought and support for the larger class sizes at middle school and the high school. A lot of those class sizes are significantly larger than the largest of our elementary school classes on a regular basis, even if we're having half the students in. I just know that I've heard a lot of concern about the larger class sizes at our middle and high school. And again, I know we as a board have mentioned in the past that we don't feel that there's always enough support staff for our students and our staff. So I just sort of wanted to put that out there because I do have a concern. And then my secondary piece to that is, I guess, recent events. Certainly, we have many board members who've been out of power, and our staff and administrator as well, have reminded us how fragile our infrastructure is and how easily many people in town can lose power, internet, and so forth. I just sort of wanted to see, you know, oftentimes it only happens in one area of town, how we're going to handle classes and attendance for students when lessons are being given remotely, either through the remote learning classroom or during a hybrid model, for instance, at our high school. You know, how are we going to be handling attendance for classes and for, you know, student access to education if a class is being given live, and for one reason or another, they can't access that class due to technology.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one because when you're talking about remote learning, and we don't control the World Wide Web. And so what we can do is make sure those families who don't generally have access or haven't had access, that we continue to get those hotspots out to families. By the time we closed in June, you know, our families that we were able, about 100 families that did not have access, we were able to make sure that we had those hotspots for them. And we'll continue to do that because I know with COVID, we could have more families who have lost their job, couldn't pay for the internet, and we're going to continue to, you know, make that service available. Some of the spottiness, which I think, you know, even probably some board members, depending on where you live, you can have days where it's not as good connection, and we don't control that on our school end. You know, we do have capability for kids who are remote. That's where we would want to encourage, if the capability is there, to go to the library, to go to some of those other places where they could still sit outside in some of those areas and still get internet access if perhaps it's just not strong enough on a particular day. But we're going to continue to work with our families and make sure that they have access to the very best of our ability.
As long as we know that if somebody, for instance, due to a power outage or other type of Wi-Fi outage, that we can be able to provide short-term hotspots for them or ways for them to access class. I don't want to create a situation where we have students who can't log into a live lesson or then counted absence, and it goes towards their apps. You know, they're not able to access their education based on technology glitches.
Yeah, if we have another hurricane, we'll have to definitely, you know, we just have to work family by family like we always do. And even when, you know, kids are coming in person, sometimes storms they'll have that happen where kids they don't come to school for a day or two because they are out of power and other things. But we'll continue to work with the families. We can't often, well, we saw it this spring. It was not easy just to get a hotspot order. The hotspots actually around the country were running short, and we went through our first ones pretty quick and had to wait probably I want to say a week or two just to get the next shipment, and they were limiting how much they would ship to school districts. So part of it will be what's happening around the country. And now, as you know, in Connecticut, they're purchasing a lot of hotspots and also working on internet access as part of the new package where they're putting more funding in. So hotspots could be even at a more difficult to get going into the fall. And you have to pay for them when you get them. They have a monthly fee. So you have to be very smart about how you actually acquire them. But we're hoping, again, like I said, by the time we went to June, we had done a really good job taking care of our families. And we really just need to be looking for those new families that are in a new circumstance.
Yeah. Well, I know I have I have a lot of questions. I'll ask one more quick one now and then turn it over to other members who have questions. I just know in the reopened materials for the high school, it was noted, I hadn't seen this before, that students are expected to log in for the 55-minute lunch block period. I guess that's, you know, in the remote learning class. For teachers to provide a mix of direct instruction and group work. And it says that attendance is required. I'd love to understand the rationale for that. I know that students will probably really need a break from being online all day so that they don't have that kind of overload, and so that they could absorb the material from short-term to long-term memory that they've learned in their classrooms, have lunch, and then return to classroom fresh and ready to absorb more information. So I didn't know why they would be required to log in for lunch.
Yeah, I might let Ralph answer that one. I don't think that they're required to log in. I think it's at lunch they have the 55. It looks like a lunch block. It's a 55 instructional, and then there's the lunches addition to that. If you look at the actual schedule, but Mr. Mayo, feel free to correct me if I didn't say that correctly.
Dr. Jones, you're absolutely correct. That's exactly the way it would work.
Okay, I guess I'm
gonna
let it go to someone else now. Thanks, though.
All right, Ms. Olson, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, first of all, to all the building administrators. I can't even imagine. I mean, I can't quite wrap my head around all the moving parts and all that goes into this. So first, I have a question just for Mark about ALP. I just want to see if I understood correctly that. Is it true that if a student qualifies, let's say for language arts ALP, are they then automatically placed in all ALP courses like math, science, language arts? And if so, can you just speak on that for a moment about the equity in that? Maybe I have it wrong, I'm not sure.
Nope, you're 100% correct. The idea was for students who have qualified for one of the content areas to remain with the cohort to minimize the number of times they would be going back and forth. I don't know, Dr. Jones, if you want to add anything to that in terms of a rationale as to that strategy.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes back to health and safety, which I think is, what we kind of keep pointing out. And we do believe that in the fall, it's really about differentiation for all kids. So we really have to assess where students ended last spring and where they are this fall. And whether you're in a general education classroom or an ALP classroom, we need to meet the students where they are. But it really is the health and safety aspect of not having kids going up and down, back and forth in the halls and mixing.
Right. I think you bump into equity with that as well, though, when that happens. But I had a question from Mary, and my questions are sort of scattered throughout. I had a question from Mary about, she said that you'll notify parents if their children in special education are grouped with any cross cohort. You said you'll tell the parents after the fact if they've been interacting with students outside their cohort. I think, speaking on behalf of many parents, I would imagine they'd like to know beforehand rather than after the fact. Can you speak on that?
I don't recall saying after the fact, and if I did, I must have misspoken. We would set up a session and then let parents know that you're going to be in speech on Tuesdays at 4:00, and that speech group will have kids from another cohort. Parents can say, I don't want cross cohort groups, which means we may have to adjust how their speech is going to be delivered. But yeah, they would know beforehand, because we do have parents who may object to that given the medical status of their students, and then we would reschedule.
I thought you said if they had been in contact, you'd let the parents know. So what you're saying is you'll vow beforehand to let parents know so that they can then either accept or decline, because I think that's also legality.
Yeah, I'm sorry if it wasn't clear. We'll let them know before.
Okay. And then this isn't scheduling. I'm impressed with the schedule. I think there's, like I said, there's so many moving parts. It's a bit off topic, but Tony, it's been brought to my attention that there's a lot of districts are having sub shortage issues, and I just want to make sure that we do what we can to for all the hybrid and in-person schooling we're planning on delivering at this point, that we round the troops for substitutes, because I know just based on age and a lot of subs I've heard in some districts are saying, nope, it's not worth the cost benefit here for me. So I just want to make sure we're doing what we can for that.
We are going to do everything we can. Again, that's one of those things we can beg and plead. And as you know, on a good year, there are periods of time during the school year where it's tough to get subs. So we're really hoping they'll return and feel good about returning. But Shemaine Johnson is actually working on that. And Shemaine, feel free to chime in if you want to add anything. I think she may be frozen because I don't, I see her on the screen, but I think she's frozen.
All right, that's all I got for now. Oh.
Frozen. Can you hear me?
You're freezing, Shemaine. Sorry.
Okay, we'll move on to Mr. Kelly, and hopefully Shemaine's internet comes back. Joe?
Joe Kelly here. I just want to say that I don't have a comment. I do have a comment. I don't have a question. I'm proud to be working with everyone's presented tonight, because we were relying in the past, or I was anyway, on trust that we would solve the problems put in front of us. I didn't see how we were going to get there. This is not a field that I have spent a lot of time in, and I hoped and trusted that all you guys would put together plans that were clearly what we need to do to move on. I know I worked at the school for 10 years and was very happy to have done that, and know there's a lot of capable people there. I was blinded to what we were going to do to solve this problem, and the clarity and the professionalism presented already in the presentations that I've seen makes me a lot more comfortable about where we're going forward, how we're going forward, and how we're going to accomplish the challenges ahead. So thank you for the professionalism.
You're here. All right, Ms. Kowalski.
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Bernstein. So I had a couple of questions. Actually, I have a lot of questions, kind of like Karen. But I want to follow up with one of her questions. She noted particularly the increase in teachers for ALP students, but I'm curious about what we are doing to provide the adequate number of teachers that we will need for our special learners in the SPED program. My concern is that we have an overabundance of kids that we focus on in ALP, which I think is great, but I think that we are underrepresenting our SPED students with adequate amount of teachers. And I'm curious how that's working and whether or not, particularly because I understand that more SPED families have been moving into the district, and how are they going to be addressed in this new remote learning?
Yeah, right. I mean, right now where we are when we talk about remote learning or versus in person, we're planning on
in person. Let's start. I have two parts. So sorry, Dr. Jones.
Yeah.
So I guess the first question is, with respect to these cohorts and in classrooms, are we going to have enough special ed teachers in order to accommodate the number of our special learners?
I think that yes, we will have enough to accommodate. And what I would say is I think staffing is probably one of our biggest discussion points. We spent a good time this afternoon discussing staffing, and you know, I think the board knows you've asked us to do this right, and in trying to make, you know, remote learning, hybrid learning, or in-person work. And if we need to add more staff, it could be a lot of staff, and that's what we will do if it's COVID related. But right now we feel like we're in a good spot.
So,
well, I say
along those lines, Dr. Yeah, the question, one specific thing is, I noticed in the Q&A that you put together, am I reading it correctly where we are that teachers who are teaching are in the regular classroom that are not designated as special ed teachers are being provided additional learning so that they too can take over and handle some of the shortfalls with respect to where we don't have enough special ed teachers?
No, we can't do that. They have to, for special education, they would need to be certified teachers in special education. So I'm not, you might just send me what question that is, and perhaps.
Yeah, because I guess I'm not understanding. It says, it's because the specific question says, with a limited number of special ed teachers per building, how will they provide services to children in different cohorts? And then it says the goal is to have elementary teachers assigned to 2 grade levels and 1 special ed teacher assigned to each middle school team. And then it goes on to say that in one particular answer, the general education teachers have worked with students with comprehensive needs in their prior classes to the pandemic. which suggests that these general education teachers are supplementing special ed teachers.
They're not supplementing. What that's really saying is that our general education teachers have always been expected to work with children who have special needs in their general education environment. And I mean, that's always, that should be the case. But what that's talking about on the grade level is, and Mary, feel free to jump in. She's worked very hard on the schedule, especially in elementary, to try to make sure that, you don't have so much cross cohorting, so the teachers are being paired by grade level, so that they're not working, for instance, pre-K5 or working K5. So it's, again, to limit the contact across the building. So it's talking more about how the scheduling is done.
And at the building level, the assistant principals and principals are working together to figure out which 2 grades should be paired so that teachers have relatively consistent caseloads. So we generally tend to have fewer students identified in grades K1 and 2, and the numbers bump up a little bit in 3, 4, and 5 when reading becomes an issue for students. So you'll see some increase. So our goal is generally that you'd have a cohort of a K1, 2 grade and a 3, 4, 5 grade, and that would allow you to spend a sufficient amount of time with each one of those cohorts. And I, we say this a lot, but that's to the maximum extent possible. So
okay, yeah, on that, well, following up to the maximum extent possible. I know that there was reference to sometimes kids were meeting and have 2 by 30 minutes, and so there's no cross cohorts. You would limit the number of period of time, so it would be 1 by 50 minutes. Well, so my math says that's the difference of 10 minutes. Are we in any way shrinking the amount of time that students are given for their that they're given in their IEP? Because according to my understanding, that's mandated by law that they have to achieve the maximum, the amount of hours that they're allowed. So are we shorting their hours by trying to manage cohorts?
We may have to make some adjustments to time, but the other thing when you think about is in 2 30-minute sessions, you have to get the children in, sit them down and get started, and then you have your lesson and then they move. If they're in one place for 50 minutes or 40, you don't have that shift. You don't have to have them get up and leave and come back again. So probably in terms of instructional time, it's equal to or maybe a little bit more. And that was just an example, but we do have to make sure parents know if we're making any changes given the schedule to what their pre-pandemic IEP is.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I hadn't thought about the shifting and moving between 30-minute sit down versus a 50-minute. You don't have the in and out. With respect to those that choose the remote learning from the very beginning, I think there was a mention of live streaming versus will those students have streaming, or will they have more of like this kind of interaction, a Zoom or a Google Meets component to their IEPs?
I think one of the problems we're running into in this whole world we're in now is definitions and terminology. So excuse me if I'm using words differently than other people are. To me, live streaming is what we're doing now. We are remotely, but there is also, we're looking at the possibility of face-to-face for some activities. Again, if we're not prohibited face-to-face based on the conditions, the health conditions, we're looking at something similar to what we did this summer at Cascade by giving students the opportunity to come to some location and get either speech or counseling or some other service face-to-face with a person.
Okay, forgive me for my understanding from prior meetings with the live streaming component, when we said streaming, it lacked an interactive component like you and I are talking now. And so if that's the case, then great. And so then my question turns to Tony. When we're referring to live streaming in general, when classes are being live streamed, is this what we're talking about, this interactive component versus where I just get to watch the teacher in the front of the classroom?
So there are two pieces. One is, for instance, for the high school, I'm going to use them as the best example. When they are off on Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Friday, they are actually, it's a webcam that goes into the classroom. They're watching the teacher teach. Obviously, there'll be a start at the beginning where they're greeting all the students. They'll come back together at the end where they have kind of that independent time to be able to check for questions and understanding with kids who are back on the computer, but that is like a webcam streaming. When you're on a Google Meets like this, you're still streaming, but it is a different type of interaction. And what we are really aiming for, and I'll just talk about the remote side, we don't feel like, for instance, a 6-year-old would be able to just watch their teacher on a webcam and have a teacher with 7-year-olds sitting in front of them that tried to social distance and keep their mask on and watch the computer and teach. So for our younger learners, especially, it will look more like this. Older learners, it will do more of the web streaming because they're capable and able to do that.
Got it. Look, I have tons more questions, but I'll give the floor to my colleagues.
All right, Miss Downey.
Good evening. I just want to say just a thank you to all the administrators for your work in putting those schedules together, because I think everybody was having a really hard time envisioning how is this all going to work. And I think all your efforts to lay out the days is going to give a lot of parents comfort and an idea of what it means when the kids go back to school, particularly in the middle school and the high school, how you guys have crafted it. So thank you. For all that. I have a couple of kind of funky questions I'll do first. Mark, I just had a question because you talked about instrumental music in the middle schools not really being offered. What are we going to do about it? Are we going to not do it in the elementary schools either?
Christina, great question. On my wall, there's a list of things that we do have answers for, and there's a list of things that we still do not have answers for. Instrumental music is right now off the table as a start, simply because of the health concerns that we have. But that begs the question then, what are our instrumental and band teachers doing? Because they are showing up for work on the first day. I'm very cognizant of the fact that they are anxious. I'm sure many of them are listening in tonight. And we are trying to determine what is the best course of action for them. They're very important members of our teaching team. Unlike the middle school model, we do not have that music theory that we can explore as an option right now. But it is one of those questions that we do need to have an answer for, and we need to have one relatively soon. But thank you for bringing up the question.
Okay. I had band kids, so, it's kind of thing I remember. So anyway, Tony, I have a couple other questions. Talking about all these staffing issues for special ed and ALP, have you gotten to the point, and I know you're still kind of figuring out your numbers, about what the budgetary impact of that's going to be and how we're going to handle that?
Yes, well, right now, I mean, we literally the survey just closed last Friday. So when we're looking at where are we sitting with staff, where are we sitting with remote requests versus those who want to go face to face, that can have impact on staffing. We code everything as a COVID expense, which is what the town had asked us to do. Right now, we could need additional staff for sure, and it could be as much as $2 million in staff additional. And I think at every board meeting, when we have our actual business meeting, we'll be updating that sheet that you saw at the last business meeting. Because
that's what I was going to ask about. Yeah.
It's ongoing, not only staffing, but just having the PPE. We've had to order additional desks because, we've worked hard over the last couple of years to be a 21st century district and move to flexible furniture that was tables where kids were collaborating, and you can't utilize those anymore right now. And we're putting them in storage.
Well, don't throw out the tables.
No, we're
not
not
back to normal.
them out.
Like, that's like a crazy here,
But even just having enough desks around the district. So you'll see that at our next meeting. But
we'll have it, because it also sounded like, from what Mary was saying, I mean, that's a lot of PPE for the special ed population. That we're going to be running through a lot of money on those. And so while we're talking about spending money, have we considered, and I know just based on the different models, putting, because I don't think it was in the original budget number or the last sheet you gave us, putting cameras in the elementary school classrooms? Because like, just thinking through all of this, as we've talked about, you know, remote learning and hybrid learning, that if you have a kid who's quarantining, let's just say because a sibling tested positive for COVID and that kid's got to go out of school for 14 days. Is there, I know it's not ideal for an elementary schooler to be sitting in front of a screen watching, but how are we going to handle those kind of situations? And would it make sense that if we're going to be putting, you know, streaming technology in every middle school and high school classroom, should we be doing it in the elementary schools as well?
You know, I would say yes, that is something that is as we continue to get into the fall, you know, we'll be looking at that. We didn't want it as our method for daily instruction for everyone that chose remote. We have talked about that for quarantining. And part of it will be getting it up and running and then trying to see if that is how much quarantining are we actually going to have and how much full building closure. We're trying to be very thoughtful in what we spend and purchase and not overbuy, but make sure we have what we need, So, and there's a fine balance there. So
no, I totally agree. And I applaud your conservative, don't want to go, you know, spending for the sake of spending. But I think if we're doing this and setting up the systems, we should be thinking top to bottom about it. Because if we're putting cameras in, maybe it's, you know, decided, or every elementary school building gets a certain number of them, not necessarily fixed in the classroom, but for usage in the building kind of thing.
The other thing we also explored, Christine, was because they already have iPads, and iPads actually are really easy to stream on as well.
Okay. And use FaceTime or whatever, Google Meets and stuff. Yeah. Okay. Then going back to what you were saying about figuring out your staffing, do you want to share with us what your results of the surveys are from parents and staff yet? Do you feel like you have your numbers set in a way that you could share them with us?
No, not really. I mean, we spent the weekend pulling numbers together. Jen Lau did a great job, but we're just not there yet. We're still right now just trying to dissect the staff.
But for our next meeting, we'll have those.
We're going to have to work really quickly, even on our staff opt-outs. I shouldn't say opt-out for staff. The staff who are requesting maybe a health or medical related, you know, HR has to have a meeting with every one of those people. They have to have their medical information. So you may have X amount of requests, but you don't know if they actually qualify. But by our next meeting, hopefully we will have more information for the board on that. Yes.
Okay. And then my final question is just as we're talking about, like you were talking about Wi-Fi spots, which was one of the things. Have we talked to some other organizations in town? For example, I know like the Boys and Girls Club or the like, to say if there's a place, if we go to remote learning, where kids can go, to find some way to utilize other facilities in town so that students have access to the learning.
Yeah, you know, and really that's what made it so hard last spring was, I think one of the reasons we had to hand out so many hotspots quickly was because families that didn't have it used other means. They would either stay after school and they had the internet, they used the library, they used, you know, McDonald's, they used just but when everything closed, that became incredibly difficult. Now I do know, for instance, Boys and Girls Club is a great example where they're really looking at it, if it should happen again, would they be able to have a different type of service versus closing down completely? So our nonprofits across town are having those discussions. And I think just as the schools are adjusting, some of them want to adjust and see how we could coordinate better together if everything were to close again.
Right, because I think there are opportunities with a lot of them in town who would want to help in whatever way they can. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
That's it.
All right, Mr. Chair, why don't you go ahead next? Ms. Hirsch has already had some questions, and I'm sure we'll be circling back to her.
Okay. I have a variety of questions across a couple of areas. First of all, just by way of toning the language in the industry, in the technology industry, is what we're doing now is not streaming. Streaming is when you put a camera in a room and you take technology and you deliver it out to tens, hundreds of people. What Google Meets and Zoom in this case are is it's essentially video conferencing or web conferencing. So it might help if the school district started using standard language so that people don't get confused by what's happening. What I heard you say, and I just wanted to confirm this, that at the high school, for all of the courses, all subjects, all classrooms, when you're out of school, the school will be streaming, meaning nobody can interact with the teacher. If you're out of school, the course is being streamed. It's not like this on Zoom, so you can't interact with the teacher during that period. That's what I heard you say, but is that correct?
On the Monday, Tuesday, or the Thursday, Friday, the teacher can actually utilize the camera, say good morning. They're all on Google Meets. Say good morning to those students, just like they would their students in the class. They would then, teach the direct instruction. When they go back to the independent learning, they absolutely could check on the computer and check in with those students, just as the students in the classroom are doing independent work, because the teacher can't move around the classroom like they normally would because of COVID. So, it's going to be a matter of checking in with those students in the seats and checking in on the computer as they're doing their independent work. So that would be for every class.
So why didn't we set it up with the monitor so that the students can interact during that class period? If you have half of the class out of the room, why is it they can't interact with the teacher?
Well, if you're on Google Meets, I think it would be number one, if you've got it on your computer monitor while you're trying to teach on a smart board behind you,
Yeah.
you don't have the class, the Google Meets kids showing on your monitor. It's whatever you're working on with the students. They can see the teacher view, and they can also see what's being presented. That's the screen that shows in the classroom, and it's the screen that shows through Google Meets. So as far as interacting, if somebody wanted to type a chat and the teacher happened to see it, but you couldn't have just half of the class at home just talking whenever they wanted to talk when the teacher can't really see the screen.
Okay, that's what we're doing here right now. I'm not understanding why we're not using that technology, but
because I'm not teaching. I'm not trying to teach it. And that's actually an excellent example, because when you think about our board meetings, we have Mike who runs the engine behind. He brings up all of the PowerPoints for us. If we need to turn off a mic really immediately because somebody had background noise, he can turn off somebody's mic. We don't have that in the classroom. It's one teacher who's teaching, and there is no moderator. There is nobody to help them present. And we want to make sure that our teachers, we've set them up for success, and that's being a very realistic environment for them to be able to control it. Not only is it challenging anyway, but it's also brand new for everybody.
Okay. So I had another question. Is you decided the cohort where everyone's in school every week for the high school, as an example. And I was just wondering on what research basis we came to that model to reduce the spread.
Yeah, I think, it's a couple of different components. I know we talked about this a little bit at the last board meeting, but, one of it was SEL, looking at it from social emotional and how we really felt about kids being out of school for a 5-day in a row or 6 days in a row. And really all of Fairfield County, interesting enough, has gone in similar direction for high school learning. For that reason, we feel like it wasn't going to be productive for kids. The second thing was, from the SEL, we thought it was very strong. After our last meeting, I know you talked about the 10-4 and talked about the California model. I actually had a parent call me that next day who had been watching and has been very much a COVID watcher. And she really believed that our model was better in what we were doing because of the 5-day symptoms, and that with our model, because symptoms tend to show on the 5th day, kids were more likely to have symptoms when they're at home instead of when they're in school, continuing to spread. And I thought it was very interesting. And so I asked Mary Keller to go and do some research on that piece of it. And it was accurate. But again, it's both of those pieces together. And it really is about a good instructional model, what we think is going to work for students to have a high quality instruction and keep them safe.
You probably won't be able to answer this. Maybe Ralph can answer it. Ralph, what changes, if anything, are you planning to do to grading policy because kids won't be able to interact 3 days out of 5?
Peter, right now we are not making any changes to the grading policy at this point.
Okay.
And I might just mention the Wednesday will look different because on Wednesday, everybody is remote. So a teacher that wants to have this sort of interaction can absolutely and probably will at the high school will have this type of interaction where they can be more all in class together versus having just half the class.
Okay. My other question is, Tony, how many teachers have already notified or indicated to us through their union or independently that they probably will not be returning?
Yeah, I'm not ready to speak to that right now, Peter. That again just closed on Friday. Shemaine's still working through those numbers, and we have no idea. Some of them can be reaching out just to have a conversation because they want to make sure they have a face shield, and somebody else can be reaching out because they just found out they're pregnant and they want to know if that's eligible. So until we get through all of those requests, and just over the weekend, I know HR had about 18 more teachers that had reached out that just wanted to have a conversation. So we'll be there maybe by, we will be there. Obviously, we got to work quickly, but be another week or so before we really have worked through all those.
Okay, and then how many students have already selected online school?
Well, that's again, we're still crunching numbers, and I'll have that for you probably in the next week.
Tony, I'm really surprised, Kimberly. We're having a board meeting and you're hiding information from the board that you have. I don't know why you're doing that.
No, not
why are you doing that?
Peter, I'm sorry. I'm going to remind you of our decorum rules.
Look, Peter, this is a meeting of the board and the public. If the public happens to be watching, they happen to be watching. I do not understand why we have this information.
You want to ask her where the numbers are and when you can expect to get them. That's fair game.
According to you, Peter.
According to our policy, Mr. Chair.
No.
Point of order. Point of order.
Yes, Mr. Kelly.
Can we please not have arguments amongst the board members, please?
Yes, I totally agree.
Thank you.
And we came to this meeting, Tony, with documents that have been prepared and they're not posted. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, we're not supposed to be running meetings where information is not available to the board and stuff is not documented.
Okay, Mr. Chair, you have actually run committees where you've brought presentations to the board and then we've posted them after the meeting.
Peter,
that has been a common occurrence. Most of these slides, by the way, were shown at the reopening meeting on Thursday. Those are available on the website. And in fact, if you go to the board docs website, these documents are on the website.
They were not on the board docs site 30 minutes before this meeting, Peter. Please don't mislead people. It's your responsibility as the chair to make sure we have the information we need. This meeting got scheduled on short notice. This is a presentation of the board. I'm trying to get our arms around what this plan is. We're all getting lots of questions about it. This is the first time we're hearing about it. It's evolved. This idea that we're supposed to go to committee meetings to follow up, find out what's going on the board. I mean, that's a ridiculous assertion. Tony, on hotspots, it's long been the policy of the board, and maybe you're not aware of this, that we were to be providing hotspots to students who didn't have internet connectivity. It had nothing to do with COVID.
Right. Yeah, I knew that. That's what I was alluding to when I answered.
Do you have any idea how that happened, that we got to COVID and there were lots of kids who didn't have them?
I think because they had so much access around town, a lot of students, if you're in a household where there are, you have 4 and 5 siblings, mom and dad, perhaps even grandma and grandpa, and it's, it's just a normal size house. A lot of those students prefer to do their work by after school. That's, what Opportunity Block is all about. They can stay after school and use the school internet. They can be at the library. The library generally is absolutely full. I still remember the day I went to actually, visit the library for the first time. It was packed with our students that are studying after school. But with COVID, it shut all of those resources down for students. So families that, may not have felt it was a need, it became a need. We also had families who had internet in their home, and during COVID, they lost their jobs. And that was one of the bills that, they canceled their service because they had to. So there's a variety of reasons, but we did have hotspots before. We needed more for a variety of reasons.
Okay. We have kids who, I wasn't clear from the questions how a parent is to move their child from the in-school to the online school. I understand, and back. So if someone's in the online school is segregated from the in-building school, right? Particularly for K-8?
It is really for K-5. 6-12 looks very similar as though we just discussed, where they're web streaming, and that way they can stay on their regular schedule, which makes it because they're old enough to handle it, it also makes it easier if they do want to rejoin. That's one of probably the challenges of Connecticut versus some of the other states where families, we've said 2 weeks, but families can kind of opt in and then opt back out. Right now there's an opt-out form, and we'll send that out again just to make sure that we actually got our students. And because of the storm, we know some people haven't had internet, they haven't had power. So we're probably pushing that out again next week.
But I'm sorry, then I misunderstood what you were saying. The last time you presented this plan, you were planning on up to 20% of kids in the district, and they were going to run if they wanted an full online option, they were going to run in a separate school that was staffed by teachers dedicated to that school. And the other kids in your plan were going to be in building, and we would take 80% of our staff for those people. The one wrinkle that you then raised in the second meeting was at the high school, you had some problems scheduling, particularly for advanced classes. So you indicated at that time that you were going to look at streaming technology to solve that problem, particularly for classes. Am I hearing you now saying that that's not how you're going to run the online school? You're going to run the online school only for K-5 and everything else will be online? That's kind of a change.
It could be a mixture. An example for 6-8, if we can keep them with their same teacher and they can actually web stream in, that would be desirable. We may have a special education teacher who is also remote, and it's better off to connect that student with the special education remote teacher. So 6-8 is a little blended, and it does. Believe me, this grows and changes every day, from requirements to the numbers, everything that we're working through. So K-5, we don't feel like web streaming is the best model because of the age of children. Yeah.
Could you address that a little bit more specifically for the middle school? So if I'm in middle school, I have 6 or 7 subjects. If I'm a parent today and I'm opting for the online school, what exactly is going to happen in middle school?
They are web streaming like you would see at the high school, and then going in and connecting with their actual teachers, so that if they want to opt back in, we have them scheduled and they can come right back in at any time. What we're hearing from a lot of families, and whether or not it'll happen here, I don't know. It did happen in places overseas, but where parents sit and watch to see what's going to happen. And if it's going well, then they want to opt back in. And Connecticut has set it up so that that's going to be very, very challenging for school districts to have students who may go in and go out. So we're trying to make sure the system is ready to go regardless of what the family is requesting.
Okay, so but you're telling parents who are listening to this tonight, if you're in a middle school and you go to the online school, 5 days a week, you'll be, I'm using your terminology, streaming, which means you cannot interact in the class while that's going on. So it's 5 days of watching a class, but you can't interact in the class.
Not necessarily, because we'll also have some teachers in middle school who also are remote teachers. And if we can have a live, like we're doing right now, which you call video conferencing, then we will be able to set a student up with that type of teacher. It's going to be a blended model in middle school. And you could also have some of that in high school, depending on who the teachers are that end up being still available to teach, but being remote. It's going to be a blended model, and K-5 is the area again where you won't see as much of that.
When do we think we'll be able to clarify that for parents, exactly what they'll get? I mean, today's the, I don't know what it is, the 10th?
Yeah, I think we're trying to be very thoughtful about it. And, you know, there are a lot of districts that have just said we're web streaming K-12. That's what we're doing. We know it's not going to be great in elementary, but we're going to do it anyway. And we're trying not to have that approach. We're trying to be very thoughtful. First of all, we have to work through the HR issues about what staff are available and how they can be utilized and what content areas. Then we have to look at how many people are actually opting out. The 80-20 was not a number that we used for Greenwich. That was a number that we were saying could happen nationally. That came really from the NEA, CEA, teachers unions, all the surveys that had been done. So we'll know where are our numbers as we start to work through this over, it'll take the next week at least.
So by when, I mean, eventually we have to make that decision and tell parents so they can make a decision about what to do. When are they going to know?
Absolutely. I mean, you're preaching to the choir. we get that it is definitely, it's a time crunch right now. And it's not just in Greenwich, it's all of the districts that we're trying to get our doors open. And I will say for us, we're trying to bring back face-to-face for K-8. We're the only district, well, there may be one more as of this week that's trying to do what we're trying to do. So it is very complex work, and we have an extremely large team of people that are working on this. And
I can tell that. I can tell that part. I realize it's a lot of work to do, and it was done.
Yeah, so it will go right up. It'll go right up, and we're really, thankful that school was pushed back to September 9th. That, gives us a little bit more time. We know, class lists aren't going to come out as fast as what you would normally get them in Greenwich, because all of this is really in play over the next few weeks. And we have to work feverishly to get there for really the 8th, which is our orientation, and the 9th.
And let me just ask the last question on this, and then I'll yield to anybody else. Tony, if a parent, it's been widely reported, and I think people are getting this from what you said in the last board meetings, is if a parent sends their kid to live school, and after a few days they're not comfortable, and then they want to take their kid out and put them in the online school. Before you said something about they'd have to wait 14 days. I don't think you mean that, do you?
No, I do mean that, actually. It's 2 weeks, but it doesn't mean that it will definitely take 2 weeks. But, given we don't know the magnitude of what we're dealing with, we may need to be creating a new section. We may need to create a new schedule for a child. There are a number of things that could take us time, and not just physically getting the schedule, but we also have the back end, which is we have to go in and physically move children and change them within our student information system and how they show up in order to stay in that compliance with the state and to be able to have
let me just clarify that. You're saying if you're a student and you go to school and you try it out and you come home after a couple days and you're not comfortable with what the school system has done, a kid can essentially can't get education for 14 days? No, that can't be right.
No, if they were with us face to face and then they go home, it'll be super easy 6-12 because you have webcams. Again, it'll be K-5 where we'll be looking what class can we put them with, and it may mean we have to put them in a class fairly quickly. And if we don't have a class, we may be creating a new one, and they may have to hop in one class to be able to continue for 5 days while we're creating a new section. We don't know how big this back and forth is going to be. And with 9,000 students, it's going to be, we're going to be watching it every day and every week. And we really are setting the 1st and the 15th as those decision days where families need to let us know if they want to make a change, trying to manage it because, again, we don't know how difficult it's going to be.
And then what happens on the reverse if you're in the online school and you want to go in building?
Then you can stay on the online school until we can get you in the building. But that's why, like in 6-12, being on their set schedule, you really have a place for them if they decide to do that. And we're anticipating to be much easier. Where it could be more challenging is actually K-5 because you're moving away from a remote teacher to a face-to-face teacher. So we need to make sure that we have everything ready to go for them, that we have a desk for them, that we have, that's socially distanced. We might have tables that, we now don't have room because so many kids came back. Finding furniture, making sure that, we have the teacher, making sure that we're not trying to add another section because, 30 kids came back all in a week. Again, it's going to be complex, absolutely. And it's the challenging piece for us here in Connecticut in comparison to other states where they made a state choice and just said, this is kind of what you're doing.
All right. Ms. Stowe, I know you haven't gone yet. Do you want me to come to you or you want me to go to Ms. Hirsch, who's got her hand up? Kathleen, did you want to go now or you want me to call?
No, you can Karen was ahead of me. I think Karen Hirsch was ahead of me. That's fine.
Yep. No, but you haven't asked questions yet, so I.
Oh, that's all right. She's already dispersed, so Ms. Hirsch.
Go ahead, Karen.
Okay. I'm coming back to special education. I just sort of wanted to have an understanding. I know that in the spring, we had sort of put a lot of the PPTs and new student requests and IEPs on hold. So I kind of wanted to know how many new special education students we have coming in this year. And do we have any idea of how many students, for instance, entered the special education program from March to now through new evaluation requests or moving into the district? As many of the IEP and 504 reviews and requests for evaluations were put on hold?
We did not enter any new students or very few new students in the time that we were out from March until June. We've been working all summer and actually we just got permission today to stay at COSCOB for another week to do the evaluations in priority order of those students who were recommended for initial evaluations but for whom we could not complete the process because of the lack of face-to-face. So the first priority of students were those students who we had started the evaluation, but then it was stopped mid-evaluation due to the closure. So we did those students first. The next group of students that we did were the students for whom we had signed consent to move to an evaluation, but we were not able to even start it because of the closure. Then the next group of students, those meetings that we have for students who teams were going to recommend for PPTs to consider evaluation, but we're not able to have the meetings at that point. So we're working through that group of kids who had already been identified prior to going out to closure. So I'll be able to tell you at the end of probably next week how many kids we were actually able to get through the full evaluation process. We lost 2 days this week because of the closure of COSCOB. So we had kids scheduled to come into COSCOB, but then the school didn't have any power. So, kind of backed us up even a little bit further. But by the end of next week, I'll be able to tell you how many students actually finished the evaluation process The next step would be for us to schedule those meetings to have the eligibility criteria pursued and make decisions. What we're telling families is that the reports that we're generating over the summer will not be as in-depth or detailed as our evaluation reports usually are. We're going to really just report on the scores and the impact of the scores. We will go back and fill in some of the narrative that we put in our reports. But right now we're just trying to get those kids through the process where the teams had already recommended evaluations.
Okay, and how many new students have we had that have entered our district? That we should have information that have, asked for requests. I know, it's been, I've heard varied numbers, at least from the high school, not from the high school, but.
Yeah, the high school is probably the highest. We have about, and here's where I'm gonna say, about 14. We've had a number of cases where parents call schools and say, I'm moving into the district with my child with an IEP, but they have not registered yet. So in some cases we put them on the rosters in red just to say we've had some parent call us with a name, but we have not had confirmation either through their registration or receiving IEPs from their home districts at this point. So I'll give you a better number as we get closer to the end of the year. We have their names, but we don't have any other information on those students. The high school, we have about 12 to 14 new students right now.
Well, I highly recommend, if you have their information, to please reach out and ask them as soon as possible, because we may need to add extra staff. We would sort of need to know that now. I have another question also for you, Mary. I know that you noted that some services may be done in the general classroom, in a separate space, and given in front of other students. I'm not really sure if that's legal or effective, which is why we sort of do pull out services at the elementary, especially for beginning readers. A lot of students have, they get bullied, or they are embarrassed if they have speech delays or severe delays in other areas. I have some concerns as to how that's being delivered. I understand, we need to handle health and well-being, but these services are long-standing and things that will also carry through for their lives, as well as, if they're being singled out in any way. And I'm also concerned, I know you were discussing how they'll be, students will be cohorted based on their grouping. The service will be delivered based on their cohort of grade, or so forth at the middle schools. I'm sort of concerned, as I thought services should be given to students based on demonstrated needs, not the cohort of students that they happen to be necessarily in a classroom with. And one last question I would have on that as well. If you're talking about reducing and grouping for interventions, I don't know what sort of research-based data you're using. I'm a little concerned. I know that we have to sort of readjust in some ways how we're delivering some of our services. If it's in a longer session in less sessions during the week, how does that work for a student, for instance, with reading? If they're not being students with support for reading and other issues that need to be delivered on a daily basis, or every other day, as opposed to one chunk longer once a week. I'm really kind of concerned as to how this is being handled.
Okay, my first challenge is remembering all the questions.
Okay.
The first question, I believe my reference was primarily about the preschool class, where I talked about direct instruction. Preschoolers do receive direct instruction, usually one-on-one. It can be from a paraprofessional with special training. In many, but not all cases, they leave the room and go to a smaller room somewhere else. Some of those spaces are not available given how much we're spreading out in the building. But the other piece is those services can and have been in the past for some students provided in like the back corner of the room. So these are for our 3- and 4-year-olds with direct instruction. Again, we're trying not to have kids moving around the building, particularly little kids. In some cases, in many cases, when we do push-in services, that's something we do all the time. So the gen ed classroom teacher has a lesson going on. The special ed teacher is in there either co-teaching or providing support for students who have goals and objectives related to that content area. So It's in no way if we thought that it was going to be embarrassing for the special ed teacher to come in and say, okay, group, come in the back of the room. That's not really the intention. But if they break off into small groups and there's 2 teachers in the room, they could separate out those kids who have particular goals and objectives that are around that content area. Most of our groups are grouped by grade, but there are some instances where there are kids either given the schedule or the nature of the instruction that they're getting, where they have students from another cohort, so another grade. So to the maximum extent possible, we're trying to keep kids in cohort for safety reasons. And like everything else we're doing in this time, sometimes safety has to trump the best possible instruction to give good instruction and be safe. So if in fact we can do that, we will. If we can't, we'll let parents know that we have to cross cohort for this particular instruction, and they will have to tell us whether they feel comfortable with that or not. Question number 3. Which what, Karen? I'm sorry. You're muted.
I think we were talking about for the push-in at the elementary. I didn't know what we were looking at in that regards. Some of the students, if you're doing a longer session once a week as opposed to multiple shorter sessions for things like, for instance, learning, reading, and other supports that need to be done in a multiple.
That's why we're hoping that when they schedule by cohort, they would schedule chunks of time. So if my 2 grades are grade 1 and grade 4, I might be in my grade 1 class for an hour and a half every day to provide supports to those students. So it could be that I see some students in a group every day for a half an hour. I see one student individually for a half an hour, but I'm in the room or in one of the 2 rooms for a chunk of time so that I'm not moving around and going cross cohort. And then I would go to my next grade and do the same thing. It may be that when I go to 4th grade, I'm there for a longer period of time because there are more kids who may have more intense services. So what the schools are doing is to try and do their cohort pairings to make sure that there's sufficient time for the teacher to be in each grade to provide the both individual and group sessions to the maximum extent matching the IEP that they can.
Okay, I know you just noted that having some staff members who are in for students with more severe needs would still be in the classroom. And again, I understand that you can do a push-in model for students with lesser needs, but I really want to just ensure that we are looking at the needs of our specific students with learning differences and other demonstrated needs and basing their services, again, I know we're talking about health and safety as well, but in the way that is being delivered to them in the way that we need. If it means we need to add specific staff to support that, then that's what we'll need to do. This is, these students are truly, have demonstrated needs that we absolutely have to address. So I just want to make sure that we're going to be doing that in the manner that's appropriate for them. And I had one other question that's not, Mary, you're off the hook for the moment. But I had a quick question for Ralph. I know the high school is being split into 2 different cohorts, Greenwich and Cardinals, based on their last name. I know I've received questions, and I'm sure you have as well, from many parents concerned that their students may never see or interact with friends from their grade level. I know the other day at the return to school meeting, you sort of addressed that there will be some opportunity for students of full grades to be able to get together for things. I know more information hopefully will be coming forward. But the other question I had in regards to the groupings is, when will families know which grouping they will be in? And in school which days, as I know a lot of parents are trying to sort of figure out their plans for their students based on the day that they're in school versus not schedules.
Karen, thanks for asking that question. Maybe Dana could answer that question a little bit better than I can at this point. Dana?
Sure. So right now, when we looked at the 50-50 split for the high school, we do have a breakdown for the alphabet. Tony, I don't know, I know you wanted to look to make sure it was okay because whatever we do at the high school is going to impact what we do at elementary and middle school. Are you?
We're very close. Right now, we're making that final decision. We've had to run all the data. The high school was, I believe, LEM. and we were LEG across the district. So we're just finishing that up, but we're very close.
Yeah, I didn't expect an exact answer this evening, but I just wanted to know, sort of when parents might be able to find out, because I know that that's a big concern for scheduling for, tons of different things for students come this fall and for parents as well. So you think that there's a possibility parents will be able to find that out within the next week or so?
Yes, we will. What we did is we first of all had the high school look where their split was, because they're the largest, most challenging building. Then we wanted to do due diligence and run the whole district, and especially then run it by every elementary school, because some elementaries that are more diverse have different last names. So we wanted to make sure that the split still worked for those buildings as well. And so we just completed that work last Friday, and then two of our folks were connecting to see where the high school was, where the district was, to be able to get it. Definitely LE. We just have to figure out the third letter.
Okay. And then I know you and I have spoken about this. I've said it before, and I know our middle school principals reached out to families before the opt-out requirement survey was asked for our deadlines, and they, I've heard a lot of praise for that, so thank you. And I would just sort of ask again that hopefully, I know that you were considering pushing out more survey information to parents. So I'd ask again that all principals really reach out to their school communities to sort of share details, some of what we're discussing here, because many parents don't actually watch our Board of Ed meetings or know to find the information necessarily on our website. And I think that oftentimes they will respond to information that's coming from their principals. So I would love to ask that we do more communication on a building level that way. I think it would be really helpful for parents to be able to have that community connection within their school start now, whether they're in school learning or remote. So I just sort of would like to make that request again. And I know Kathleen has a bunch of questions, so I shall.
Not a bunch. Nope, not a bunch.
Let's go ahead.
I'll try to keep it short here. As always, I'm going to try to take a step back. I'd like to celebrate that my alma mater, the University of Notre Dame, started classes today, and they posted an interesting message. They said, in these challenging times, we all want clarity and certainty, but we need to remain flexible as the world evolves around us. And I thought, what a perfect message, because that's exactly what we're trying to accomplish here, right? We're prepared for all options. We have a remote, we have a hybrid, we have an in-person. This team has been working obviously tirelessly. I even appreciated how the presentation of the 3 middle school principals was done together. You guys obviously did a lot of planning there. This is what we need to be doing, right? We need to continue to be in favor of the multiple plans. I mean, I'll tell you right now, a lot of friends have asked me, what are you doing with your children? I have elementary kids and a middle school kid. My plan is for them to go back. They're wearing masks. They're getting ready to do that. We'll be talking about that policy shortly. But there was a great Facebook post that said, don't judge anyone for their decision. So I'm sure I have friends that won't be going back, and that's great because there's a scenario for them as well. So I have sort of 2 themes from that. We obviously had a little bit of a tough spring. I think, Tom, you even sort of said there were a lot of lessons learned from that. How did the summer program go? I'd like to hear about that. Are there any lessons from that, so that for those that are choosing the remote option, or if unfortunately we go back into that for everyone, what did we learn? Can you tell me some of the specifics? That's number 1. And 2, what's the professional development for the teachers right now, given that we have some extra time around that? And that's all. Thank you.
I might let Anne speak to summer school. I know she's on here.
So we have learned a lot about summer school, about our experiment that we used for your children and for our teachers. So far, the initial data from the surveys that we have sent out is that there's a big improvement from the parents stating that the summer school experience was much better than what it was this spring, which is what we were looking for. We don't have all the surveys back yet, but we are hoping that it is going to continue being very positive. The teachers really appreciated the time that they had to work with the students and to try and work with some of the new tools that they had available to them. They were appreciative of having the pop-up professional development that our coordinators gave them all summer. They had synchronous and asynchronous learning. Once the coordinators would do a professional learning activity with the teachers, then they made it so that the teachers could access it anytime on the web to review it, to see if there was something new that they missed or if there was a question that they might have had. Teachers also found that it was really very, very helpful for them to team with other teachers that were teaching the same level. And they found that having that conversation with one another was really very helpful in planning. So far we've gotten some really good positive feedback, and we also have the feedback that was a challenge. We had a number of classes that were extremely challenging. We didn't have textbooks. We didn't have it prepared as well as we thought we would have. The testing environment was not a positive experience, so that's something that we are also looking at. We think we have found an answer for that. We are working on that. I'm working on that with Jen Lau right now. So we are hoping that we have addressed the challenges that came up from this summer so that we can be better prepared for the fall in our remote learning and if we have to go out for everyone. So we're still in the gathering the data information, but so far we've learned quite a few lessons, both what to do and what not to do.
And that's sort of, and you'll incorporate that into the professional development in the first few days. Okay, got it. All right, thank you. That's the right trend. I appreciate that.
All right, Ms. Kowalski.
Thanks, Mr. Bernstein. I had one follow-up question with respect to quarantine, and if there's no other questions, I guess we can hopefully move on to something else. But so I have a concern, and obviously I think this comes into play with parents who have multiple children within the school system. So for example, and I'm speaking because I've got one in elementary, one in middle school, and one in high school. So let's say one child in elementary school is exposed because another child parent has COVID, they've been exposed. Now you have, the decision is made that that class or one child within the siblings needs to be quarantined. How does that affect the other siblings? And from the Q&A that I've read, this suggests that the other two siblings or the other siblings in the house, regardless of number, would not need to be quarantined, meaning they can still come to school. Are parents going to be, or families going to be forewarned that you've got an exposure with one sibling, but other siblings are still coming to school? How does that work?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have the health guidance people on here today and tonight, so that's not my specialty area. I will say they are continually updating the guidance from the state. As recently as the end of last week, we got guidance on if we have an issue, are they quarantining, not quarantining, what causes the school to go remote. So they're still giving us guidance. This morning, I did hear that they're trying to refine some of this quarantining guidance, and that if it's not actually a full exposure and a student may go home for several days, if they don't show any symptoms, then they would be able to come back to school. But again, until they refine that for us over the coming days, the Department of Health really just last week started giving us guidance. Before that, it was all coming from the local health department, and everyone was waiting on the Department of Health. So we still have more to learn over the next month as we start up school, and how they're going to direct us in that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Scher.
I wanted to, Tony, I just wanted to repeat that back because you used the Department of Health. So you're deciding I thought the last time we talked, you presented a 4-tier completed protocol on when and how we would close. Are you now saying that we're not following that? We're waiting for guidance from someone else?
Well, there are different, in our actual planning document, there's a decision tree that says like whether it's student quarantines, or where but the last week, at the end of last week, the state updated a chart, and actually the governor did it in his public announcement that shows how many COVID cases per 100,000. And if it is a very low infection rate, then you should be face-to-face. If it is, and I think the number was 10, you know, if you had greater than 10 brand new cases over 100,000, then you should consider remote. Hybrid, and that if it was 25 cases in 7 days per 100,000, then you would actually consider remote for your school district. So the Department of Health just issued that, yes.
So we're not making a local decision. You're doing exactly what Hartford tells you to do.
No, I wouldn't say that actually. It's not really me. I actually work with the local Department of Health. I work with Dr. Katie Noble, who is our consultant for the town, the pediatrician doctor. Then they also take direction from the Department of Health at the state level. And now if it's like last spring, as you know, they dictated most of what we had to do through executive order. So it will depend on what the status is. Right now, it's very much a local decision, and we work with the Greenwich Department of Health and our staff.
My other question was, I've learned tonight that much of what we'll have, I guess, at the high school and the middle school will be a lot like what we had in the spring, which is, I guess it's one step up. What we had in the spring is Zoom was banned. Some teachers took it upon themselves to record their lesson, and then they posted that on the internet, which is streaming. It's not doing it at the same time. So they're streaming. They gave a lesson, they put it on video, they posted it, and a student could stream it when they were ready to watch it. And then what was also happening in the spring is you were able to email questions to your teacher, and then the teacher would respond in email. I think by week 8, you set up once a week a small group where a teacher could over video talk once a week to their teacher. And it was done up into groups of, I think it was up to 3 or 4 students, but it could have been one-on-one. That was a decision for the teacher. That was the way you laid it out in the spring. So I realize we've evolved from that now. So, but for these kids who are going to be streaming, how and when do they interact with their student and with their teacher? And what is the turnaround time? What is the service level from the teacher for the teacher to actually respond and interact with the student? Is it same day? Is it next day? If someone's streaming and they can't talk to their teacher, and then the teacher's got to go on to the next class to deliver, right? Now the student has questions. They send them in presumably via email to the teacher. What's the expectation of when the teacher's going to respond?
Yeah, no, it actually is quite a bit different than last spring because they're watching live teaching. So when a teacher starts the lesson, they can say, hey, everybody who, is at home, welcome, you're welcoming your kids in your class. Everybody is hearing the same opening, however teachers, start the day. You start the live instruction. And when a teacher's doing live instruction, you're going to have some questions coming from the class. It depends how the dialogue is going. Some teachers may, turn their computer around if it's a discussion mode where they could hear kids on the computer. Some teachers are going to do the live instruction, 10 or 15 minutes of new learning. Then they're going to start their independent group work. You would have a group on the computer who are virtual. And then you're also going to have kids in the classroom. And at your last 10 or 15 minutes of the class, as a teacher, you could be sitting at your desk looking at the kids on screen, answering their questions, while you're also answering questions for kids who are actually in the classroom. And it is a brand new skill set. It's not, going to be easy. What you can't do is when the teacher is actually live teaching, try to be doing live teaching, using the smart board, sharing your screen, doing all of that, and also be carrying on conversations with students and trying to make sure they social distance and trying to make sure they wear their mask and all of those other things. So it is definitely going to be different than last spring, and we're very optimistic about our approach.
I'm sorry, Tony. Now I'm really confused, because when we were talking about streaming, we were only talking about stream. I understand that Mark has built a bunch of time in there for that small group in elementary, right? That's the way it is.
Well, that's actually, that's high school.
If you go to a high school class, there's not that amount of time. So
it's the same. It's the same in a high school and a secondary classroom. They don't just stand and like lecture for the whole 50 minutes. You greet your kids at the beginning. You have transitions. You're live teaching new content, and then the last portion of your lesson, you can be taking questions. And again, the teachers will be able to do that through Google Meets, just like we're doing right now and having a conversation.
Okay, I'm sorry. That's just different than what you said half an hour ago. So I'm just thoroughly confused, but okay.
Well, and on Wednesday, the teacher may be just like this, because remember on Wednesday, they're full remote at the high school. So the high school on Wednesday could be different, and depending on what the teacher is teaching and what the content is, and how they want to approach it on that particular.
I think we're winding up. Here's what I'm concerned about, and I'll say this, and we are where we are. I made clear a long time ago my reservations about this model, but at this point, candidly, I need this model to work. There's a whole bunch of stuff in here that I like about this model that you've developed. There's a whole bunch of stuff, and I made it really clear a long time ago, reservations I had about the model. At this point, it doesn't matter, because for you to change anything else at this point is actually, I think, going to lead us to a really bad place. So we need the model that you've developed as you've developed it, which is clearly centered around going back to school. And I've raised that concern a long time ago, and okay, we need that to work, because if we have to go out, I'm uncomfortable with how well prepared we are. And, but we are where we are. So we need this to be successful. I don't think you get to success, however, by, we have to have to Ms. Stowe's point, she says the words, which is we need to be flexible, but this model's pretty rigid. Your ability to move between is pretty rigid. The interaction with students, I'm really concerned about that, because you're going to have a situation where if you're in a building, you're going to have a lot of interaction with your teacher. If it happens to be that on Thursday and Friday, if you're in an advanced math class, as an example, at the high school, and that happens to be what's in that unit of study, and that's particularly challenging, we've essentially set ourselves up for something very uneven. And the reason it's uneven is we're going to say, half of you can engage with the teacher when that's being taught. The other half of you have to either wait or do it offline. And I'm concerned about that. Now, hey, we are where we are. And the point I guess I'm trying to make, Tony, is I would hope, as an example, I'll give you a really good example of something I'm really concerned about. Grading, okay? We have teachers at the high school who are still, even though our stated strategy is mastery and personalization, and we had, and I don't know if you've changed it without talking to the board about it, but we'll find that out. Essentially, we have an entire assessment construct. And that assessment construct is tied to our strategy. I'll give you a good example. We have teachers who are still evaluating kids.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, hang on a second. Yes, Mr. Kelly.
I have no idea where we're going. I've lost this trend of conversation some time ago. Is there a question? Can I ask the board member to ask some sort of question, please?
Thank you.
Tony, my concern is that we still are evaluating kids based on homework and class participation. That's why I asked Ralph if he thought about changing grading. I would feel a lot more comfortable about this strategy if he said, you know what? We've thought this through and we're only going to evaluate kids and grade them based upon their mastery of the content at whatever pace the kid can access the content, because we're going to have a very uneven school system, and that's our reality. And I think to accommodate the school system to that reality, I'm looking to be sure how tight this plan is, and I'm concerned about it. And Joe, I know you don't like hearing this because you don't like this subject, but you know, I'm sorry, you'll just have to be respectful and patient.
You addressed me. My response to you is I might like the subject. I might not like it. I don't understand what you're saying.
All right. Dr. Jones, do you want a chance to respond before we move on?
No, I think we've talked enough about it, that we feel good about the model and we're ready to move forward. And I'm thrilled with the work that, you know, all of our principals are doing to get their buildings ready, and the central office team. So.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Hirsch, and then I'm going to wrap it up.
No, I was just going to note that I think there seems to be some confusion, and maybe this is where Mr. Scher is a bit confused, that there was a discussion, and it's you know, in the documents, about there's a difference between the remote school option for those who are opting out fully and the in-school learning and the in-school hybrid model. And I think that may be where the confusion lies. And I know that there's been a lot more detail shared in the documents that we had the opportunity to discuss, I think, tonight, you know, when you have an opportunity to read through those. And in all the FAQ documents and things like that Dr. Jones has sent out to parents and to administration and so forth, things that come through from the town hall meetings as well. I know that there were over 900 questions that were asked and answered. So there's a lot of detail, granular detail in some of those. I don't know if that's where the confusion lies, but I think that may be part of it, because I think that, you know, the discussion on remote learning, all the kids are going to be sitting and having a live class and live interaction with their teachers in a scheduled environment. And for some at the hybrid model, it was going to be an opportunity to have streaming classes for some of those students, because we don't necessarily have multiple teachers that teach certain levels of courses, like an AP calculus class or something. So I don't know if that may be where the confusion is. I don't know, but I wanted to offer that up as a note.
Thank you.
All right. Tony, this is Peter Bernstein. I do have a couple of odds and ends questions. A lot of what I wanted to ask has already been answered. One, just going back to ALP in elementary school, you know, it still looks like we're adding basically extra adults coming in and out of the classrooms and in the classroom cohorts. I know you guys have spent some time with that, and I know Mark went over a couple of models. I guess what my gut is, the less people we have obviously interacting with the cohorts, the better. So, you know, as you continue to refine that and figure out how it's actually going to work in the buildings, just please keep that in mind. I also want to bemoan the loss of middle school seminar. I know it's going to be built into language arts, but that truly is, I think, a very special experience for those students that take it. It definitely helps a lot of students think differently, deal with logic differently, and be better prepared for certain courses in the high school. So if there's any way to figure out how to salvage that, to really do a deeper dive and not let it just get blended into a language arts curriculum, I think that would be helpful. I also note, Tony, you said there's going to be more town halls. So I think I got elementary, middle, and high school, special education, remote learning. Did you also, are you doing this for both students and parents? Will there be something separate for students?
Yeah, I would really like for us to do a student one as well. But right now I'm trying to work out it's the calendar aspect of finding the time in the evening. So, but we're looking at that, and then the special education one. So it's a little bit bigger than what our focus groups have been, because I know there are a lot of parents that would probably dial in for a special education group as well.
All right, thank you. I do note the state actually put out yet another document, interim guidance. I think it's addendum number 5 now to the reopening plan. Ms. Kowalski, I think it actually goes to address part of your question about what happens when a student or staff person develops symptoms of COVID. So I did share that with the board earlier. It's on the state's website. And I think
that's addendum 4, just so you know.
No, that's addendum 5. Addendum 4 actually is the guidance for decision-making on which way you open. And actually I was gonna reference that next, so thank you for pointing that out. So basically at this point, we are aimed and directed at opening in-person K through 8 and then a hybrid model for the high school. And that is based on the indicators. Basically, it's based on the infection level in the community. You know, Greenwich is in a particularly interesting situation where we do look to Fairfield County, but we also look over the border of Westchester. You know, given where we are, we're in the place where we can actually be discussing in-person learning. And for those who want to opt out, that option is there, and they should be availing themselves of it. And I know that they are. You know, we will continue to move forward. We're about to move on to agenda planning. So, you know, we know this is not the last time we'll be discussing this topic. But I do want to pause. I want to thank the superintendent, all of her staff, all the administrators, all of the teachers, all of the parents that have all been participants in this process. A lot of people have been reaching out, filling out surveys, sending notes to the board, working on committees, doing focus groups. I just want to thank everybody for the thoughtful effort. It's not easy. Often when we do this, you know you're never going to please everybody. And I think when you're in the situation where everybody's not pleased, it's probably when you know you're doing the right thing. So yeah, I'm positive in the position that we're in, and the direction that we're moving. I don't think the work ever stops here. We can't ever take our foot off the gas pedal on any of this. You know, we continue to watch what others are doing around us. I know Tony's been talking to the superintendents elsewhere. We've been looking what happens, you know, in the state, nationally, and internationally. So this will continue to evolve, and you know, we'll be here. And board, when we get to agenda planning in about 2 minutes, actually not even 2 minutes, we're going to talk about meetings. So with that, we're going to move on to our next item, which is agenda planning. So just to kick this off, for those of you who can look at the document, and Michael, I don't know if you can bring it up. It might actually be helpful for part of the discussion. The agenda plan is really the work of the Superintendent Policy Governance Committee, and then it comes to the board for discussion. It really sets out the topics that we want to take up for the next cycle of meetings. You'll see location listed. Usually we list Havemeyer, or you'll see the September 17th meeting scheduled for Ham Ave School. Because of COVID, we've been meeting virtually for months. As we move to send our students back to school, it is really my thought that we also should be meeting in person. I think we'll continue to do Zoom based on the limited number of people we could have inside a building. It probably would be the board and cabinet, and we would still live stream in. Michael has been working on that with other folks. We hope to have some answers soon, but by the time we get into September, we will probably be meeting as a board in person. We'll be following our own mandates about masks and everything else. But I just want to point that out so everybody that's looking at our agenda plan know that when it says location, we may be moving to a different location. We're going to see if we can safely do this at Havemeyer if we pick one location, but we will continue to do that for those of our loyal followers on Zoom. You know, I think we should continue Zoom even after this is over, because it really allows people to access our meetings. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the superintendent, and then anybody else that wants to have a discussion. Dr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Bernstein. So starting really with September 17th, you'll notice that's a really big business meeting at the beginning of the year. There's a lot on that meeting. The assessment executive summaries on there. We'll have some reports. We hope to have the JC Ed spec back on for you. Been working on that this summer. We will probably, Peter, I think as you said before, have to add in here another COVID meeting just that is not reflected on here. But obviously that will be something in the next week or two that we'll look at. On the second page, we're starting with October 3rd. That is, again, we have to start up that conversation about the strategic plan and how are we going to be approaching that through the school year. And hopefully, if it's the same committee that's working on that, we can actually map that out so that we have a good plan of when things are going to happen, so that we're in a good place at the end of the year. We'll also have some information just to share with you about achievement data with Linkit, and let you know kind of how that assessment of where we are at the beginning of the year. And then the COVID-19 update will stay on there. How's it going? You know, letting the board know how things are going in October for us. And I'm not going to read through every one of these, obviously, but then we have a business meeting, and that actually Cost Cobb Library, and just go back to that, is very similar. It's what we did last year, and we felt like it was very productive, where we just had time to actually dig into some of the data. We don't have the same data going into this year because we didn't have any state testing last year. So a lot of those major assessments really aren't applicable this year. But you will be able to see what we are doing to really assess where our children are, our young people, so that we are closing any of those gaps if there were some from COVID last spring. Then we move into the business meeting again, end of October, having a special meeting for the expulsion hearing. We've plugged those back in. As you know, we use those if we need them. If we don't, we take them off. Also, there is a first read on the operating budget, and that's plugged in. It seems so quick, but that's just when it happens. It's November. So we'll be right back into the budget as we already are, and also looking at the capital budget, and that's November the 5th, updating the facilities plan. I've plugged in on November the 12th. That is the special education review. We're hoping that a company that we work with will get our results so that it can help us during the budget season. They are going to have to work quickly. But again, that's what that meeting's been set aside for. If you go down to Wednesday, November the 18th, again, that's just a lot of the usual stuff that you would see. I did plug in on this one a Cardinal Stadium update. We're going to want to, be sure we're updating the board specifically on where we are. Also a soil update on Western. We've been working on that this summer. As you know, our voluntary remediation plan is in. We're really trying to get to that point so that next summer we're ready to start moving some dirt. So I want to be sure I keep the board up to date throughout the year on that. Go ahead, Mike. Again, you've got a budget meeting just for budget, then a special meeting, which is the orientation. And I didn't know if we would need that or not, if we would have any new members. You never know from one year to the next. If we had new members, that seemed to work well for us this last year, where we actually had an orientation and spent an evening. The next item, again, there's a lot of budget stuff on there, and these are very similar dates to what we have had in the past. For our business meeting in January, again, we want another strategic plan update, looking at the board goals. This is kind of when you looked at them last year, and then also getting a STEM update from Hamilton Avenue School, and an update just on our district, our initiative as far as technology and how things are going there. On January 28th, I have put in again a special education update on outplacements that seemed to be very helpful for the board this school year. And so I thought once we get to mid-year point, that's often when we can kind of see what's changing, where we are, and not only during the budget process, but that executive session was really to understand at a deeper level kind of what's happening within special education. So in February, again, a lot of these are very, very similar to what you would have seen. If we have any new courses, looking at policy, basic stuff. March 11th is the review of the data and the goals, and that's for the superintendent. Again, a strategic plan review, continue that discussion. So I've plugged them in for us along the way. March 25th, same thing again. So on April the 8th, this is the special education program follow-up. And this is not only because we would have completed the study, we have the devising seminar, we generally have a report in the spring, but this is also where are we from what we learned, earlier in the year. Are we starting to think about how that's going to impact, programmatically or things going into the next year? So that's just, again, a special night for a program follow-up. For April 22nd, again, that's very, very standard. Your secondary school summaries, textbook recommendations, nothing unusual. The board self-evaluation in May, followed by the business meeting, having another, really want to have another field update for Western and another Cardinal update. Definitely for Western, where we're already into May, and if we're going to be doing summer work, we want to make sure the board understands what that looks like. And obviously during the budget, as we're preparing for that work in the summer, as we know, there comes, it's quite a cost that we're going to have to be working with the town on, because we'll need the funding to do that work next summer to get that started. So we want to have several meetings on Western. And June 3rd, again, discussion of board goals, agenda planning. Going into June, this is the superintendent's evaluation, which is pretty typical. We will have a TEPL, and my screen just went away. It does this to me. Hold on one sec. But I think I'm almost through June. Peter, I'm going to kick it back to you because I can't see the screen, and I'm going to log back in.
Not a problem. All right, so we've gotten through our meetings. Actually, while Tony's logging back in, if board members could look at their calendars for next week, Thursday the 20th, I think by then we should probably be ready to take up the mask policy, and Dr. Jones can tell us where we are on numbers of students and teachers. And everybody look at their calendar and just let me know if you're okay on the 20th when you speak. And Dr. Jones, you'll need to let us know if you're good on the 20th too.
I'm fine.
Thank you. All right, we'll do a little roll at the end, but Ms. Hirsch, you have your hand up.
Yes, I know while Tony is still looking through some of her documents, I'd like to sort of make a request of, for an addition for our agenda plan. I'd like to add an update on the SPED review, where where we are with our RFP and who's been selected to the start of the year at least, and really a follow-up to the SPED program review that we had at our February meeting at Western. I know the board had a lot of questions and concerns and asked that they be addressed and that come back to us. I don't see it on our agenda plan until February of next year. That's kind of a long time to wait for those questions to be answered. And I also would like to see if we can get an update on the final Key to Ed's devising seminar report. I know that in February, Dr. Jones had sent us a draft. And we mentioned it and discussed it at our February meeting again. And we were told that we would be getting we would be able to revisit that and get a finalized, the finalized Key to Ed report back as soon as they approved that draft. I think that's really important that we have that in hand prior to the SPED audit program, program review happening. So I'd really like to see when we will be getting that, since we've been waiting for that since February.
Yeah, we were working on that date, and I believe, Mary, correct me if I'm wrong, it's going to be October 22nd. I need to add that on here for devising seminar.
Yeah, just one thing. Before the final report, there needs to be a final devising seminar. There's one more step in the process that we didn't finish that would happen before that. So we had talked to Joyce Little about trying to do the last piece of the devising seminar somewhere at the beginning of October, so that she felt if she had about 2 weeks, that would be enough time for her to give you the whole report, which would include the last step.
Okay, well, is it possible that maybe that we can then ask them to put that final devising seminar, even if we're doing it via, a Zoom for people sooner rather than later? We have the RFP out. I don't know when that's closing and what information we'll be getting as to who's going to be doing our special education audit. I really think it's necessary for them to have some of the documentation in hand before we start in October, before October. So I really, we've been waiting for this since February, that final report. They've had more than enough time to try to kind of work through this. So
no, the report, you have to understand that this is part of a whole process.
Oh, I'm very aware it's for a process, and the information that we've gotten in February was a draft report, and that we were supposed to be getting a finalized report shortly. I have all the information, so I just would like to, it's been since February we've been waiting.
No, but the report will come out, and the final part of the report is the recommendations part, which is what we do at the last devising seminar. So
So I'm asking if we can reach out to them to have that set up sooner rather than later so that we can get the finalized report.
I will certainly ask them. We thought that given everything that was going on the beginning of October would give us some time before we got together to do that.
Okay, well, the sooner the better, like I said, since we've been waiting since February. And so I'm asking that we can put some special education program review, since we were waiting for updates from the February report prior, sooner rather than later, so as to not wait a full year. So that was my request for our agenda planning.
Yeah, we have planned, Karen, for them on the October 22nd to present to the board. So, and that's, I was going to add that on actually before we posted it. I apologize, I missed that. And as far as
I hadn't seen it when I was looking at the original agenda plan.
Yeah, I had it on my notes, but I didn't get it on the printed part. As far as the special education study, the RFP did close. They're all sitting right here on my table and right next to me. And I will be asking some people to help contribute and look at those, including you and Karen Kowalski, who are also our SEEK reps, to start going through them. Just like we do when we have a building and construction project, and we want to go through the RFPs, the people that are on that committee help do that. So I will be reaching out to you.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
And I think Karen's point about having something for special education before, I don't know, February is probably a really good idea. So Tony, as you look at the calendar. All right, Ms. Downey.
Hi, okay, a couple of like building related things. On the New Lebanon Building Committee, we need to add that in for the September 17th meeting, because we're going to have they're going to present the building. They've got, hopefully we'll have the C of O by then. So we should have that as an action item for September 17th.
Okay.
That was number one. Number two was the GHS entryway. I mean, I read it quickly. I don't know if you had anything in there about the ed specs for that, because aren't we moving? I don't know if we need to, or we sort of have those. I don't know if we voted on that.
You did. You've already approved those.
We did approve those. Okay. All right.
Yeah,
that's fine.
It's now with the Board of Selectmen for the actual formal building committee.
Okay, that's fine. And then my question, the JC ed specs, I know it was moving along, but now we don't have any A&E money in the budget, but we're just going to go through and finish doing the ed specs for when the time comes that we do go forward with it. I just was kind of questioning.
Well, we've done all of the work for the ed specs already. Just getting the report like the way it looked. So we need the board to approve the ed specs so that when we put it in the budget again, we're ready to go.
Okay.
Yeah, we're starting the OG ed specs also right now as well. And
okay.
So
we're just going to have a bunch of ed specs approved, and then when the financing comes through, then they're ready to go.
Yeah, hopefully that'll be a big discussion now that we're going to have ed specs for 2 buildings. And do we want to do design on 2 buildings at the same time? So that'll be part of the capital discussion for the board.
And for our colleagues on the BET.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Mr. Scher.
You can let Karen go first.
Your hand was up. Please go ahead.
I just had some general concerns that I want to share with my other 7 board members about the board's agenda. This agenda is essentially a copy of what we had last year. If you compare the two, it's almost identical. There's a couple changes. And I've made this, for those of you who are new, this won't be new for Peter Bernstein, is, our role is to govern the board. Our role is not to manage the school system. That's Tony's job. And what I'm concerned about is I look at how much of this agenda time is actually being spent not on, bigger strategic issues, governance issues. If you look at the timing as an example, between last September when we came in and March when we effectively shut down, there were 107 items that we covered on our agendas. 20 of them were education, 10 of them were buildings. And I'd rather be spending time talking about the educational issues. I'll give you another example. We only talked about science, technology, and mathematics all combined in one session once, but we talked about bleachers at Cardinal Stadium 4 times. So I think our plan is just a little out of balance. And I'd like to see us spend more time talking about strategic educational issues. We should be spending more time talking about curriculum. You'll notice in this plan this year, as an example, there's no discussion of English, social studies, or foreign language, or history. It's just not even on our agenda, this proposed agenda this year. And so I wanted to say to the board, and I hope this was going to be a discussion, that maybe what we could do is give feedback, I guess, to the Policy Governance Committee who put this together, or I guess Tony put it together. And I'd love to see another revision of this that's a little bit more centered on education and education issues and a little less centered on, you know, things like bleachers and building entrances, although that's important. I'm glad it's here. I'd also like to, what is missing in this plan is there's no dedicated discussion about achievement gap and closing the achievement gap. You know, last time we kind of had that, but it was roped into 4 other subjects in a retreat. We were given data. It was kind of a one-way delivery narrative. And I just think we need to bring a little bit more balance to it. I could make specific suggestions, Kathleen, to your committee, I guess, but I didn't come here tonight. I think I also have to worry about, my other concern is
This
about
wasn't my committee,
timing.
by the way. This was not
What's
done by
that?
my committee. This was not done by my committee. So.
Oh, under our policy, it's supposed to be done by your committee. I'm sorry. I
No,
heard
actually,
somebody say
Gaetan took
earlier-
that up as a, she did that. That's not actually the case. Gaetan sort of took it on as when she ran the committee, but that was not the case. But anyway, keep going. I understand where you're going with it, but I just wanted to be clear about that.
Okay, well, I think somebody said at the beginning of this, done by policy governance. Okay, so you guys, this all is coming from Tony, I guess. This is the first time you're seeing it then, I guess? Okay, whatever. I gotta go read our policies, because I'm pretty certain our policy says it's supposed to come from your committee, but anyway, here or there. The question is, how do we get it done, and how do we have it be board driven? I'm also really concerned, as Mrs. Hirsch is, about sequence and timing. I think our role on the board needs to be engagement, not just notification from the. So I think we need to really think about, are we engaged in these strategic topics in the right way at the right time? So as an example with special education as an example, I don't want to have notifications. I want to have discussions before decisions are made, because that's our job to govern. So that's my general feedback on this thing. And Peter, maybe you can make a suggestion. I'd like to hear other board members' thoughts about this, but it also, if you could give me some guidance on who and how best to, if you need me to, make specific suggestions about actually changing subjects on specific meetings, I can do that. I just don't know what's the best way to engage here.
Thank you, Peter. I will say Dr. Jones shared this with the board via an email, sent it to all members of the board July 14th, 2020 at 7:32 p.m. in case you're looking for it, and asked everybody to take a look and see what questions we had. So I would say at this point, yes, feedback is a good thing and a positive thing. You can send your feedback directly to Dr. Jones and she can accumulate that together. If you'd prefer to work through board members, that's fine. You can send it to me and I will work with Dr. Jones. You know, Peter, I hear you on the education front. We've had this conversation before because we take up each major subject area once a year. Those meetings became all encompassing and we used to add on, you know, 10 other agenda items at those meetings. So, you know, I don't think we've ever landed on a good spot in terms of how to make sure we're having those conversations. we did try to break those subjects out into their own meetings. So we'll see if we can respect that. You know, one of the things I think we really do need to focus on, though, is our strategic plan, because that really would direct the work of the board. Right now, you're right, it looks a lot like last year. It's kind of a scattershot approach. It's a lot of different subjects. We cover a lot of different programs. And so how do we do that in a more holistic way? I'm with you on the special ed. I think we need to have conversations as we get the results back from this audit. I think that's what that meeting in November and the follow-up in the spring we're going to be about, as Dr. Jones presented them.
Peter, just to give you feedback on the comment, I mean, I could take this with you offline. If you listen carefully to what I'm saying, I think this is the board's agenda. The board's agenda needs to be driven by the board. It's not something we delegate to the superintendent. The superintendent doesn't drive our agenda. I appreciate you delegating the task, the staff work to her, but to be candid, this needs to be an agenda developed by the board. I'm not comfortable. I'll just say it outright. I am not comfortable engaging and trying to convince Tony on an agenda. I so far have not had a very, unfortunately, I've not found that productive. So I'm asking you as the chairman to find another way to get that done. And I think it needs to be the board setting the agenda, not the superintendent setting the board's agenda.
Well, Peter, I appreciate that. And as I said, I'm open to receiving feedback from you. This was sent out in mid-July, and I don't know that any of us actually responded. So, but, you know, open for feedback now. We do need to get this in place so that we know what we're talking about. We get staff teed up for
but tonight
sooner everybody gets
correct. This is the first time it's been on our agenda for discussion, correct?
Absolutely. So the sooner people get in feedback, the sooner we can have a revised draft in front of us so that we can action it. All right, Ms. Kowalski.
Sure, thank you. So having gone through this, this is my first agenda to comment on. I guess I would like to see and figure out how to build in, or how we are going to take into account. I know there's always been an evaluation period, and I think Peter had the right name for it, and I'm going to butcher it, but to compare and contrast how kids are doing year over year. And I think particularly this would be an interesting time to understand how kids are doing year over year, given the fact of, you know, we haven't been in a school setting since March, and to see how we are doing in comparison and where we're seeing, you know, where we're slipping. And I don't see that built into this plan in how we're evaluating that. And maybe that's an issue because we haven't been able to, you know, one, we have to be able to test the kids to see how they're doing in comparison, but where would that naturally fall in this?
Right now, that's intended to be on October the 3rd, which is that achievement data, which is Link It. Those are those assessments that was brand new, our new data warehouse and instructional planner that would tell us from, for instance, the kids who are in 4th grade this year, going into 4th grade, how much did they master at the end last year of 3rd grade, and where are those gaps and holes based on the data that we have. So, and that's where we did actually that discussion last year, was it's the retreat we actually, this one says Cos Cob Library. Last year we did it at the main library. So that's where that happened. Yeah.
So we're planning on conducting tests at within the first month of the kids going back to school. They'll be assessed as to their current status, and then that data will be compared to what? Because I understood LinkedIn to be a new data program for us.
Yeah, you're actually comparing it to, it kind of goes back to what Mr. Scheer said earlier. He wanted us to be mastery based. That's exactly what Link It does. So Link It will look at what are all of the standards from the end of 3rd grade where a student we would hope that they are proficient. Having gone through COVID, some students, if they're had a sickness in their family or a number of other reasons, may not have done well, you know, just to distance learning. There may be some gaps and holes from March through June. So we'll be able to look at that and say, okay, in 4th grade, this is how we did at the end of 3rd grade. Here's where we are. This is how we're going to approach in 4th grade to be able to fill in some of those gaps and holes if there is something from 3rd grade. So it's very much mastery based, and that is, and that may be a date depending on when we get back to school. That may have to be pushed out another meeting depending on how quickly we can make all of that happen, because that's going to depend on when we get kids in school. They start September 9th because we pushed that back. Are things going well? Are we staying in school? The kids that are face-to-face, the remote will be easier. It kind of goes back to your quarantine question. Are we back in and everything's going beautifully, or are we back in and there are other challenges?
Okay. And now the other thing, and I think this just goes back to Ms. Hirsch's comment, is with respect to special ed, I'd like to get that report sooner rather than later and have that possibly even earlier on the agenda. And I can look at this because it looks like that September 17th meeting is really full. But I do think we need to address that sooner.
Thank you.
Mr. Sheriff?
Just as an aside, Kathleen, just do me a favor, go back and read policy 9132 and 9133. What I wanted to be sure we're doing, Tony, is the board, through its actions before you arrived in the district, and I think I pointed this out before, essentially as part of our strategic plan, which we approved and that the board had to vote on, as well as an assessment system. There's an assessment system that the board approved. So I'll be looking for, if you guys have deviated from that, it's important you come to that meeting and be certain you're complying with what it is we voted on. So if you haven't had, you or your staff had a chance to do that, I know you've been busy with other things, so I wouldn't expect you to be spending a lot of time on this. But it's really important to me that, as the board has taken votes, whether it's this board or the other board, just because there's some new people, that doesn't mean we can't follow what we've already. There needs to be continuity in what it is we've decided to do. So I would encourage you to go back and look at that. I'm concerned, and I know it is already, in some cases we're not following it, and some decisions were made by somebody not to do that. I'd rather you get back in compliance so that when we have the meeting, it's just focused on that. And I want to say it so that it's not a surprise in the meeting, so that everybody has enough time to get themselves lined up.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Peter, to that, to that piece, I think you're talking about ECRA, and because we did not have state data.
No, I'm not talking about ECRA at all.
Okay. Yeah,
okay.
You might,
there's a whole bunch of aspects to it. If you'd like to call me, I'll gladly give you a point of view. I just want you to be hopefully in compliance with the decisions that the board has made. And, the IT systems to do that, I don't care which IT systems we use. I just care that we comply and follow essentially the decisions the board's already made. It's your decision, as I've said, to manage the district. It's our decision to govern it. And these are governance decisions that have been made. And it's just important that you and your staff, you guys make whatever decisions you need to make on how you get there. I don't think other people may want to micromanage you. I don't think that's the role of the board. That's your job to do, executive. It's your job to figure that part out.
yeah, sure. I'm happy to give you a call. I'm not really understanding. So I think if we leave it there, and I can give you a call so you can explain what you mean.
Okay, I think that's it on agenda planning. So again, board members that have feedback, different ways they want to attempt to do this, please do send your comments. You can send them directly to me, and I will work with the right folks. All right, moving on to the last agenda item for the evening, which is policies. I'll turn it over to Ms. Stowe.
Yep, and by the way, Peter, I'm just reading policy 9323. Karen was good enough to send it. I'm not home. And it says the superintendent of schools shall prepare all agendas and supportive materials for meetings of the board. In doing so, the superintendent shall consult with the board chairperson and appropriate members of the administrative staff, and as necessary with the board secretary. Any board member who wishes to have an item included on the agenda should notify the superintendent in sufficient time for the superintendent to review the request with the board chairperson for his or her decision on agenda placement. So
Yes.
definitely
Also,
feel free to send
says,
us.
no, since you brought it up, I didn't want to. I just didn't want you to be embarrassed by this. It says,
Keep going. I'm happy to keep going.
Hold up. Policy committee will recommend to the board new and revised policies and will annually organize a board meeting schedule and work plan for the board's agenda planning process and submit an annual report.
And that's the calendar. Kathleen. That's the calendar to me. I mean, we could debate this offline, but to me, that's the calendar. And those are the dates.
The work plan. Look, Kathleen, I've been on this board 10 years. It's always been this way. That's my only point.
Okay, fine. I'm going to agree to disagree, but now I'll go to the mask policy. So, for the mask policy for this evening, I sent this to the board, and I just wanted to sort of point out a few things for those that are still listening. Obviously, this is a state requirement. We used as we do for all of our policies now, we use CABE as our guidance. They provided the template. There are likely to be more policies that we will need to address or suspend, for example, visitors to the school. But we thought this was the first policy we should be focusing on tonight, since obviously this is probably the most important thing for the health and safety of our children and our staff. A few things that I think you should note and the community should note as they're reading through this is face coverings. We made sure that the mask materials are defined appropriately and did add what was not considered appropriate in terms of materials. So I think that should be something we note. We added proper storage of masks, since that's quite relevant during mask breaks to remain effective. Like my son said, can I just put it in my pocket? Apparently that's the wrong answer. So, things like that we need to be talking about. It should also be noted, which I imagine most of you know this, but that there will be training for staff and our students on proper wearing, removing, and storing of the masks. And I also think it's important to note that teachers might remove their masks in order to enhance the instructional experience, but only when more than 6 feet away. And you could think about that in times where someone needs to be seeing your mouth moving. So I think those are the things that I wanted to point out. Like I said, this is very much the first read. So taking all comments, I want comments from the community. We're happy to keep meeting, obviously, as a policy committee. We'll probably continue to get more guidelines as we learn more, but I wanted to just get this in our hands as quickly as possible so we can start talking about it. I'm sorry, I forgot the most important thing. Christina and Karen did the majority of the work here. So Christina is our resident counsel. Karen is obviously our policy expert. And so please, guys, if you want to share something first, go right ahead.
Yeah, I think Karen did a ton of homework, so she should be applauded. But the CABE policy gave us a really good framework to work around, and we tried to anticipate where the glitches were in it and kind of tighten it up so that parents and staff know what the expectations are, trying to minimize the administrative headaches that can be involved by really setting forth expectations in as clear a fashion as possible. So again, I think to reiterate what Kathleen said, it is a first read. So we're happy to take comments and questions about how we came to certain decisions and from our fellow board members, because we spent a lot of time talking about it last week. So Karen, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add.
The one thing I wasn't sure if I heard Kathleen note, I know it was in her email to the board, is this was not, oftentimes CABE, the Connecticut Association of Boards of Ed, which sort of oversees, or helps direct boards. The state of Connecticut gives us suggestions on policies and recommended drafts of policies. We've received information from CABE as to some suggested policies. This was not a suggested policy. The mask face masks and covering was a required policy for Board of Educations based on the mandate from the state. So we are required to add this to our policies. And to, we use theirs, again, as Christina said, as a basis. I researched across this, the country, mask policies. Most of those were based on their own states' requirements or guidance, but we just wanted to sort of make sure that we covered all of the finer points, crossed the T's, dotted our I's, and so forth. So happy to answer any questions or what have you.
All right, Ms. Olson.
First of all, thank you. Thank you to Policy Governance Committee for all of your work with this and your continued work. I think you're a highly effective team, you trio, and very knowledgeable, so appreciate it. I have a question about masks. It's sort of near and dear to my heart, but I know that there are some, as it says in the policy, that will be medically exempt from mask wearing. My question is if we want to add something in there about, and we also know that we may be limited to we heard earlier in the presentation about schedule and whatnot, that we could be 4 feet from each other in a classroom at any given time. So is there a ratio, a certain number of unmasked students per class, medically exempt unmasked students per class, that we'd want to add in there or be cognizant of, as it would put all the other students and all the other adults in the entire school at risk?
I can't speak directly, give you an exact response to that. I can say it's something we would certainly need to check with legal. I don't think that there's been any information given to us, by the state or other organizations as to a specific number or percentage. I do think that if and it's not in the policy, and I don't want to say something that's incorrect, but I would assume that it's on a case-by-case basis on the numbers and the needs. And if things needed to be revised for a specific student and their needs. That's why I think that there's stuff in the policy that sort of says if a student can't wear a mask, maybe there's a possibility for them to wear a face shield, be behind a plastic barrier and other sorts of things. But I don't think that we can say that only a certain percentage of students, but it should be,
Okay, I'm just thinking it's no
Megan, we did actually talk about that as because obviously if you have an excessive number of medical exemptions, it defeats the purpose of wearing the masks. So we did discuss it, but we did not, and Cabe did not have a suggestion of how to handle it, and we kind of were grappling with it amongst the three of us about what the right solution is. We don't have that answer, so we're happy to have feedback on saying if more than X percentage. But if we have a substantial number of students who are not wearing masks, the practical reality is that may affect our ability to have in-person instruction. So we really, whether it's 10%, whatever, you pick a percentage, but we did not have an answer to that, but we did consider that it's problematic in terms of medical exceptions. So that would be part of why this is a first read.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. I just think it's a really important point to look at. I mean, I speak about often as my experience as an educator and as a teacher in a classroom. If I was teaching a class with, I don't know, half the class, a third of the class, maybe a quarter of the class medically exempt, I would not stay teaching in that class because that's just not safe. And we need to keep our educators safe. We need to keep our students safe. We need to keep the office staff, our administrators. We need to keep everybody safe in the building. And that compromises our safety, which, as said earlier, health and wellness is a paramount importance here. So I think it needs to continue to be explored. But other than that, I really do appreciate, and including that, I appreciate all the time and effort and energy that's gone into this. So thank you.
All right, Mr. Sheridan.
I guess you said Karen and Christina did this. So by the way, thank you for doing it. It's not fun to do this stuff on the fly. So you guys did a really great job, and thank you for doing it. I had two questions, I guess, and maybe a comment. One question was, what feedback did you get about this draft from the teacher union and the administrator union?
I don't think we've gotten any feedback from anyone yet.
Well, the administrators, Tony, does this with us, right?
Well, Tony, but I mean,
Right.
but
not-
not beyond the committee. No,
Yeah.
no, we have not really heard. So,
Okay. For those of you who are listening, I'm interested to hear what they have to say. The second part is that I realize this was put together and, you know, you guys had to put it together. Had you thought about maybe it feels a lot like a policy and a regulation together. And I'm wondering if we ought to stay in our lane on the board and kind of do the policy part and then move more of this maybe to regulation, so it gives the administrators the flexibility to make decisions in an uncertain environment where they don't have to worry about they're violating policy. So I don't know if you guys want to think about that, because there's a lot of stuff in it that's super prescriptive.
Well, I
totally agree. Totally agree with you.
Imagine how it developed. It's something to think about.
Just so you know, Peter, there was a lot more in here that we actually had as a discussion that was given to us by CABE that we wanted to remove because it really was more regulation than policy. And if there are specific details in here that you'd like to see as regulation versus policy, please do send us feedback or read segments.
I'm keying off of essentially, you know, Megan's question, right? Her question is absolutely a great question, right? And as you know, you know how hard this is, right? You can get like overly super prescriptive. We have policies that some are like the Policy Governance Committee, your predecessors, not you guys, may not have cared about the subject, so we'll have 2 lines. And then there was other ones where they wanted to put everybody in handcuffs, so they write 3 pages. I know that's not what happened here, but I'm just thinking about how to find that balance. Just food for thought. The one thing I would like to see, though, in this is I'd like us to have a sunset date to it. And then it forces it to come back to the board. As you can imagine, there are people in our community who are, you know, I happen to be in the group. My family is still quarantining as much as we can. Everybody around here wears masks. We don't go out. That's a personal decision. I realize there are other people who are completely living on the other end of the spectrum.
What kind of sunset date would you like to see? Like, I mean, you know, do you want to link it to orders, to a school, to the school year?
I would put it
further
at the
board
end.
action.
I would put it at the end of Q.
Yeah, Christina, we kind of can add.
I would put it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Somebody else.
No,
wants
I'd like to hear
talk.
what your thoughts are. Yeah.
I'd have it go through the essentially the fall and have it come back in January to see if we have to continue this into 2021. That would be my suggestion.
Or would you rather just run it through this academic year? Because I mean, that's what I think the practical reality is, and that it would be for this calendar year. For this academic year, we can always, as a board, revoke it or suspend it. But you know, I'm just talking about board efficiencies and time spent on agendas. You know, do we really want to have it further?
I guess, Christina, here, there's a lot of people who have political sensitivities around this. I don't. Okay. So and you know, there are lots of people who are being very dismissive about different groups of people in this day and age. It's happening everywhere. I think we should just be thoughtful in that. I'd rather, here's what I don't want to do. Say a vaccine arrives, right? A vaccine arrives, we're going to have a conversation about what we're doing directionally about policy. If a vaccine arrives in the fall, which it might, and it becomes available, we're going to have a different conversation about January. If a vaccine doesn't arrive, you're right, we're probably going to run through all of 2021. I don't want to drag the school system into this kind of debate. We don't have a particularly strong medical committee advising the board. We don't have an epidemiologist on it. We just don't. So I'd rather us just stay out of that is my thought. So I would just put it on as an item at the first of the year, and it'll be easy and perfunctory. We'll know that we need to continue it.
So just as an aside, and I know where you're coming from, because, you know, we don't want this to seem that it's in perpetuity, that we're going to have this policy forever going forward. But I will say at the start, it does specifically stipulate that this was implemented for the requirements only during the COVID-19 pandemic. I do think that we can add and should add something to stipulate, you know, if there is a change in state guidance that can, you know, we should address this if there has been a change in the mandate.
My suggestion, Karen Wood, I read your whole thing. In the last statement, if you read your last sentence of the whole thing, that may be a good place just to say, and this policy should be in place too. You guys pick a date. I don't want to get into picking a date. You know what I'm thinking about. I'd love to see you just add a date there. I think it gives people who are naysayers, who are uncomfortable with the nanny state, it just takes that issue off the table. Just make it go away. It's a totally nonsensical issue, and I'm just trying to like make it go away.
Yeah, no, I think the last sentence, sorry, I was just gonna say, I think the last sentence is the right place to put it, and let's just, we have to come back anyway, so it's a good comment, and that's something we should include.
Yeah, I don't want it to seem like this is in perpetuity, but it is until the mandate is lifted. So I'm only concerned about
I'm into taking issues off the table. The more we can take off the table, let's do it. That's all I'm saying. You guys figure it out.
All right, with that, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you for all the work everyone put in on this. I do appreciate that. I do have a question. If you explained it already, I apologize, but I'm going to ask it because it's a little confusing. Now, you used words like state required, mandate, guidance. A few of those things were said. Why hasn't the state given us a policy to put into our policy? Why do we have to create one? Since it's going to, why shouldn't it be standard across all the districts in the state if they're mandating it?
So it's a good question, Joe.
Well, I think it's.
Go ahead, Christina.
No, go ahead.
No,
I was saying, because it's a state mandate that the masks have to be worn, but they don't have the implementation element of what is, we're defining it to give clarity to our students and our parents and our staff. But like, because if you just say you have to wear a mask, right? That's what the state's saying in super simplistic ways, but that doesn't really tell you anything about what we need to communicate to our families and staff. So the CABE gave us a framework of what their suggested policy would be, Joe, and we took that and tightened it up, took out things we thought were too detailed with that, this balance of trying not to get too detailed, but detailed enough. And this is what we came up with. So that's.
Thank you for all the work you put in on it, but it just seems that every district would have the same needs. It's almost as if we're reinventing the wheel.
But some districts are going to be more flexible, maybe about what they're going to allow, and maybe what we're having carve outs. What is not a mask? State doesn't say what's a proper mask.
Okay, thank you very much.
Right. I mean, that's what qualifies.
To be fair, Joe, they keep updating, they keep adding. So it's possible that in like 4 days, we're going to have more information from the state that we'll incorporate. We're trying to be a little more proactive. We have a little bit, but not everything yet.
Yeah. We were trying to, and the reason we also focused on this, to be honest, was knowing we needed to have a first read before we can vote on it, which needs to be in place before the school year starts. So we had to get this process moving along on this policy. And if things move around a lot, we won't be voting on it at our next meeting. We might be another meeting afterwards, but this really needs to be able to be in place on the first day of school. Actually, the first day when the staff come.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That was very
So this is Peter Bernstein. I've got questions about the types of masks we're not allowing. So you said surgical. I'm not sure exactly what that is. Is that not the paper surgical masks everybody's walking around with?
When they were discussing, that wording actually came directly from CABE, and that's when they talk, the ones that our physicians are wearing, the big the surgical, it's an
Oh, the
actual
big
surgical mask.
respirators. All right, I got
Yes, the big
Okay.
respirators that look, kind of full face mask that really, yeah.
And I just the other thing I want to point out is I know it also says no to the valve masks. The FAQ that went to parents actually says those are allowable. So if we do move forward with this policy, that FAQ needs to be updated. And from what I've read, those are not effective, and in fact are good spreaders. So
Yes, that's why we added it. So thank you for noting that there's a discrepancy between that and the FAQ.
okay, thank you. All right, I'm not seeing any other hands. So
Peter, to your point, Tony presented in the last plan. I want to be sure it's still true. The student shows up at school and they don't have a mask that complies, we're giving them one, correct?
that is correct.
Okay.
All right, so Kathleen, do you have any sense of when PGC might be able to meet again? Because obviously we were going to look for another meeting date, but I want to make sure we give you enough time.
Yeah, Karen and Christina, we're okay with later this week, right?
Yeah, that's fine. I'd just like to ensure that we have provide enough time for members of the board and anyone else to be able to reach out to us with questions, comments, and concerns. And if we need to actually do some sort of research or speak to legal about it, that we have the time if need be.
Well, so I'm looking at the calendar for next week. And Tony, I don't know if you're unmuted, but it's probably going to be helpful at this point. I know Tony is doing a program with the League of Women Voters on the 18th. So we probably could meet either the 19th or the 20th. So Dr. Jones, why don't you tell us what works better for you, and then we'll survey the board members.
Didn't you just say the 20th? No?
The 20th would be fine.
All right. Does anybody have an objection to meeting earlier in the day, like 5 o'clock? I know there's some people that have something they want to do with that night.
Which day?
Hold on, Peter. Don't say yes yet. I'm looking.
Yeah, check your calendars.
What do you mean by earlier in the day?
5 p.m.
I can't meet at 5. Why do we need to meet at 5?
Because there are some folks that had some stuff they needed to do that night I already know about. So how about 6 o'clock? Can we do 6 o'clock on the 20th?
It's fine with me.
Any objection to 6 p.m.?
Not at this moment, but
All right, so we
It happens to be my spouse's birthday, but he's going to be okay with it. So
he can dial in the meeting.
Such as a board member's husband.
So tell him I promise we won't sing.
I could do 6 o'clock on that night. Yes.
Thank you. All right, so we would probably take up this policy. We'll list it as an action item if we're ready to take it up that night. If we need more discussion, we'll discuss and we can put off a vote. And then obviously we can do a quick reopening or super update. I know Tony, people were looking for the numbers on students and teachers. So hopefully that gives you enough time. It's 10 days from today.
Yes, I think we're going to launch it again because people are having power issues. So I think Jen is pushing at least the teacher portion out again for a couple of days. But I think by the 20th, we should be close enough.
Okay.
And then do we want to vote on the agenda plan?
We can put that on there, although I have a feeling that may need more work, but we can definitely put that on there as well.
Well, only because then because we're now at that point, August 20th, if we start having meetings.
Start moving into meetings. That's fine. And hopefully by then, Michael is hard at work again on location and possibilities for going live. My presumption is the first live meeting would probably be that September 3rd date, I think. So we'll work towards that as a goal, but we might be able to get an update on that at that point. All right, that concludes our business for tonight. Mr. Kelly, did you have a motion you wanted to make?
As a matter of fact, I did. I would like to make a motion to adjourn.
Well, I'm going to happily second your motion, and we'll just take a quick roll call vote. Bernstein's a yes. Stowe?
Yes.
Hirsch?
Yes.
Downey?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
Kowalski?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
And Cher.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And to those 58 attendees who stayed to the bitter end, Have a good night.
Thanks. Good night.
Bye.